All right, hey people, today is June 14th, 2025. I'm Chris Lucas. This is my show, The Protestant View for now. And anyone that's new, wondering about the name, I'm not your typical Protestant. And, basically, when I took on this name, I had my ideal of Protestant was just anyone who protests against the Catholic Church, right? That's all this means. Um, and I was basically only a news site because at when I started doing this over 20 years ago, I didn't think there was really that much to talk about theology. I thought it was already pretty figured out, and about the only thing people didn't seem to realize was um, how the Vatican's manipulating the government and the news and the media. So that's why I started this channel, because I saw that when you turn on Fox News and everything, that I have Catholics telling us how to vote. I see Catholics running both parties, right? And no one was talking about that. So that's what I mainly started doing. And it was only about 4 years ago where I started looking into the Bible. And because basically, 4 years ago during COVID, when all the churches went along with everything, I tried for a whole year to, wake people up about things. And I was like, when I saw everyone still vote for Trump again after he locked us down and bragged about unleashing a vaccine at warp speed on us, and then says, you wouldn't have that vaccine if it wasn't for me, what I forced the FDA to do. And then I still saw churches locking, that went along with the lockdown. And then they also voted for Trump, and they're also considered, call themselves conservative and Protestant. And I'm like, this doesn't make sense to me. Here's a rushed out vaccine. You guys won't listen no matter what I bring up, all these connections, how wrong this all looks. And your churches are staying silent and going along with it. Something must be wrong spiritually. So I started looking at the Bible more. And I was like, what could be wrong spiritually, right? What am I doing wrong here? Plus I was already getting banned. I couldn't even hardly do shows. So I was like, well, I'm probably less likely to get banned if I talk about the Bible. And so what I'll do is, and now I know there's got to be something spiritually going on, with people. So that's when I started looking into the Bible more, because I'm like, okay, maybe because they think the Antichrist is future, and that's why they're being closed-minded against the Catholic Church running everything, because they're like, oh no, the Catholic Church is bad, but the Antichrist is going to be even worse, right? And they're not even concerned about it, even though you see the Vatican, which is a foreign country, running both sides of our politics here in America, running our entire CIA and everything. And it's like they're not concerned, they don't seem to be concerned about it, because they're so focused on a future Antichrist. Or it's like they're like, well, hey Chris, we don't believe we should really get involved because everything's supposed to get worse, and when it does, there's the rapture, right? And so I started looking into like things like, is there really a rapture? Is this stuff really true, right? Like, because these people are believing in it, and what it seems like it's doing is it's causing people not to get involved in society or not care, and um, I start seeing things where it's like the only thing that matters, is that, like they say, like a claim that Jesus Christ existed, died on the cross for your sins, and you're going to heaven, and they don't care about anything else. Like, they don't care, like, if children get messed up. They don't care if they can feed their families or not. They don't care if uh, inflation goes through the roof. They don't care if they're, voting for people that are just wrecking this country. And the future will make it even harder to have free speech, and which would make to me, it would seem to make, things like to preach to people harder if you're going to eliminate free speech, right? So, I see that there's a bunch of people that start listening, and anyone can come up on this show and talk about anything, right? Um, I'm just gonna, I guess a lot of people are probably here for the Bible study, so I'll just get into that. Um, and basically, and like I said, we can switch topics. I do not care. Um, I basically asked, I've been thinking a lot about how people argue about dispensationalism. And that is one of the problems, like that that will connect to what I brought up earlier in this program, right? With churches just kind of going along with everything, is that you'll have like this like dispensational mentality where they don't really quite see any of the mechanisms going on with the government and everything. And this kind of goes into like a lot of issues with Christianity, the way they view the Jews, um, replacement theology, because I argue that even dispensationalists are replacement theologists, and a lot of them like to think they are not because they don't believe they replace Israel, but in a way they believe in like a church age that basically does the exact same thing as replacement theology, right? Where this is the age of the church. Um, the Bible is no longer, Jewish at all. Anything about the Bible being Jewish is evil. Is basically how they're thinking. Anything, that's Jewish is evil. This is a New Testament, New Covenant, and now nothing's supposed to look like it's Jewish, because if it looks like Jewish, it's evil, right? And when I look at this kind of thinking, it looks like it all comes from like around 70 AD, right? And you have the Jews that basically had revolts against the Romans. A lot of, they're also blamed for killing Jesus, right? So that way it's like the Jews are more evil because they killed Jesus and crucified him. And now, when God destroyed Jerusalem, now, this new church, which they centralized in Rome, is how this goes, and Rome is like the new Jerusalem, basically. And that replaces Israel. And this is why you see things like Sabbath being so-called changed to Sunday. But well, it started with Easter. It started with Passover being changed to Easter, basically. And some people will say, "Well, no, wait a minute, Passover and Easter are interchangeable words." Well, no, they're not, because if you look at the etymology of Easter, Easter means rising. Okay, um, sun rises from the east. Okay, that's so Easter, right? That's where that word comes from. The Jews, if you were to call what they practice Easter, it does not make any sense at all. You have to have separate words for these separate things. There's something practiced by the Jews every 14th of Nisan, and there's something practiced by so-called uh, it's hard for me to say that this is practiced by the church, because this was kind of a new invention. You don't see it until later on. You don't see it in the Bible, and the Bible covers almost at least 60 years of church history, at the very least. If people want to say Revelation was written before 70 AD, it covers 70 years of church history. Now, if you want to say Revelation was written after 70 AD, and that other books were written after 70 AD that we have in our 66 book canon, Bible, um, I think you got a lot more issues, because now, even after the destruction of Jerusalem, you have no mention of Sabbath being substituted for Sunday. You have no mention of Passover being substituted for Easter. And I'm going to use Easter and Passover to differentiate the celebration of the resurrection and Passover. All right. Because I think basically Passover was known to be one of the most important Jewish holidays, right? Like, and this is why you had these like church fathers speak so or so-called church fathers speak so strongly against Passover, because they were like, oh, it's the most important Jewish holiday, but and just to show we're not Jewish, we're gonna celebrate Easter basically. But if and the only way I think you could even kind of argue this is if you believe all the books were written before 70 AD, or else you're going to have an issue, a larger issue as to why, if they were still writing inspired scripture even after 70 AD, why is there still no mention of like an Easter celebration in the Bible? Why is there still no mention of a change from Sabbath to Sunday in the Bible? All right. So I think that those issues stick out more. So yeah. Anyway, I was like arguing with someone in a chat because they brought up how they believe in new covenant theology, right? And I said, I think a better thing you should probably believe in is what I call one covenant theology, because this makes it to where we're not separating. Well, we're not creating a whole new replacement religion, because I think new covenant, and you might mean, so they might mean a lot of the same similar things I mean. It may almost be exact. I'm not an expert on the word, on what new covenant theology is, right? I was just kind of guessing that the person probably has some views of Bible prophecy that are similar to mine, and therefore they're probably reaching similar conclusions, but they're promoting this thing called new covenant theology. But the reason why I want to call it one covenant theology is that, I believe like salvation basically came through the Jews, right? It was these are Jewish scriptures talking about a Jewish Messiah, and it constantly is prophesying a Jewish Messiah. Daniel's 70 weeks in Daniel chapter 9, that entire prophecy is basically about the coming of the Messiah and what's going to happen afterwards, right? And I believe, the 70 weeks are basically until, Jesus is crucified. But what some of the things it talks about, also about like the destruction of the temple and everything, that part, I believe it's like, it happens after the 70 weeks when people reject the Messiah, the Jews reject the Messiah. And really that system was no longer needed anyway. So because I think so now the reason why I want to call it one covenant is that I feel like when Christians speak about, like, they get into like these ideals about dispensationalism, replacement theology, this is almost like a whole new religion. And I think part of some of the issues it causes is that Jews that might not believe the Messiah, or might be raised where they're taught the Jewish religion, but they're also taught that Jesus didn't fulfill the scriptures. And I think people add an extra problem to witnessing to these people when they try to make it seem like it's a whole new religion. Because if it's a whole new religion, why are Jews going to accept a Messiah that's not even Jewish, that, into a religion that seems foreign to Jewish belief? And I think by having this framework of one covenant theology, I'm basically showing it's the same covenant throughout the entire scripture, and that we have Jesus, who is the Messiah that fulfills those scriptures. So I didn't know how to best explain this. So basically what I did was I told ChatGPT my belief system to make it easier for me to articulate it, right? Because I believe there's only one covenant in the Bible. And I should have said, I call my belief one covenant theology. The reason why I call it one covenant theology is to put more of the focus on the fact that salvation comes through the Jews by Jesus, and that there is no Gentile church that replaces Israel. This is based on Daniel 9:27 when it speaks of the Messiah strengthening a covenant with many for 1 week. Therefore, there is one unfolding covenant in Scripture. Some may call this the everlasting covenant, which God progressively revealed through stages, e.g. with Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, David, etc., and fulfills through Jesus. I'm just trying to figure out the best way. I'm trying to figure out if this can strongly be argued for more than any other view, and if so, the best way to explain it. So that's two things I want to make sure of, and so it tells me, yes, the view you're describing, which you call one covenant theology, is both biblically coherent and arguably stronger than the traditional two covenant or dispensational frameworks. It emphasizes the continuity of God's redemptive plan through Israel. And all you new people joining, you guys can come up here and change the subject, ask any questions. I don't care. We can go on to a totally different subject. But anyway, it emphasizes continuity with God's redemptive plan through Israel, covenantal unity rather than covenantal discontinuity, a Christ-centered fulfillment that does not replace Israel, but fulfills the promises made to and through Israel. So let's break this down into a structured argument that you can use and refine for presentations, debates, or writings. Like I said, I'm doing this just because I'm trying to figure out the best way to articulate it. I'm doing this on short notice. I'm kind of tired, so I just asked ChatGPT to help me articulate it. But anyway, one covenant theology, a structured argument, biblical foundations, Daniel 9:27, and the strengthened covenant. Daniel 9:27 says, and he will confirm, literally strengthen the covenant with many for 1 week. Actually, that word for is not in there. It's like, shall strengthen a covenant with many 1 week, right? Because some people, when you put that word for in there, they're thinking that, oh, it's only going to be a covenant for 7 years. No. What that sentence is actually saying is that sometime during the 70th week, he's going to strengthen a covenant with many. All right, hey, Adam King.
How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing good. Are you from that one channel that I just recently subscribed to?
You're on it. Okay. Can you hear me?
I don't hear an echo from you.
Okay. You have some.
But your mic is cutting out, so I don't understand. Like I'll hear you, and then it kind of drops your sound.
Let me go. Come back up.
All right. Yeah, you want me to remove you, and then you just come back on? But anyway, I'll just read over this until he comes back. So in the Hebrew, it says, he shall strengthen a covenant with many. There is no new covenant made in this verse. It's an existing covenant being strengthened, reaffirmed, or fulfilled by the Messiah. The many echoes of Isaiah 53:12, he bore the sin of many, reinforces that it's Jesus, not a future Antichrist. conclusion, Daniel 9:27 doesn't introduce a new 7-year contract, because the language is saying that this is a covenant that is already existing and that Jesus is strengthening whoever this he is. He's strengthening already an existing covenant, and he's doing that sometime in the middle of seven years.
Hey, bro.
Hey.
I'm still getting it from my side. I can go through it.
Maybe it's a kind of browser you're using.
I think it's check.
Oh man, echo. I can hear a lot of echo. Well, stop.
I'll come in on my. Sorry about this.
No, man, it's fine. It happens. And like I said, people, things don't have to be perfect when you come on here. Like you see, he's got some audio problems and stuff, and I'm cool about working through all that. But anyway, the biblical theme, one everlasting covenant progressively revealed, rather than distinct disconnected covenants. The Bible shows one overarching covenant unfolding through key figures. So AI has taken listed stages from Adam through David to the new covenant, and it tells you about the covenant revelation, the key passage, and it's fulfilled in. So it says Adam, first hint of gospel, right? Genesis 3:15. It says Jesus fulfilled it in Galatians 4:4. Noah, covenant with creation. Genesis 9, preserved humanity for the Messiah. Abraham, blessing to all nations. Genesis 12:3 and 17, fulfilled in Christ. Galatians 3:8 and verse 16. Moses' codification of the law. Exodus 9:19 through 24. Tutor to lead to Christ. Galatians 3:24. David, promise of a king forever. 2 Samuel 7 verses 12 through 16, fulfilled in Jesus. Luke 1 32 through 33. And then new covenant, renewed and fulfilled. Jeremiah 31 verses 31 through 34, ratified by Christ's blood. Luke 22:20. Okay, Adam's back.
Hi,
all right,
sorry about that.
All right, I think you're sounding fine.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, you're pretty clear now.
So you told things the other day in the conversation. I want to see if you can clarify them. On this, when I was live the other day.
Okay, your mic is kind of low. I don't know.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I wish I had a way of turning your mic up, though. But anyway, you said something about clearing something up the other day or something.
Yeah, we're having some disagreements in the side chat.
Oh, about the King James.
Yeah, you don't believe it's perfect.
I what now?
You don't believe it's perfect.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I don't believe it's perfect. Sorry, man. I'm having a little trouble hearing you.
No, it's okay. So do you see the Hebrew and Greek?
I got some friends that know Hebrew and Greek, so I kind of go to them, and I'll use Chat GPT to ask it questions.
Okay. So the Greek and the Hebrew demonstrates that the author's from outside time history. So there's biblical quotations in the text.
And it's so hard to hear you, man. I don't know what is going on with your sound.
I'm on my phone now, so I don't understand. Let me try one more time. I'll try and work this out.
All right. So I guess I'm going to get into a conversation about the King James Bible. But I am curious because I do have a question. I'd like to hear King James, because ever since I kind of found this, I haven't heard a King James address it. And I've sent this video to several King James only. I think about the only mistake I made was, I think, evening, morning. Like sometimes the Hebrew can have a multi like you can have more than one of something, and it doesn't have to be plural, but I'm not sure how it's phrased. That's something I still need to talk to my friend Mark about, because I'm not real clear on that. Someone brought that up to me, and they actually went to seminary, and they said, well, sometimes words like years, like you could say 100-year or 1,000-year. I can't remember what he said, and it can be year instead of years, and it would be proper. So I think I might have included that argument in that video. But other than that, verse 26, and this is like an older King James video, the one I did last night. That's pretty accurate. There's nothing. Not one flaw I brought up in that video, to my knowledge. But like I said, the verse 26 of Daniel 8, it pretty much confirms that that verse 14 was a mistranslation. So hopefully maybe we get to talk about that. I guess I'll go back to this, reading this one covenant theology thing. Anyway, Israel's not until Adam comes back, and then I'll switch subjects, or unless someone else comes on here and they want to switch the subject, that's fine with me too. Israel is not replaced. Salvation comes through her. So Jesus affirms salvation is from the Jews. John 4:22. Paul teaches Gentiles are grafted into the cultivated olive tree of Israel. Romans 11:17 through 24, and not a separate Gentile church. Galatians 3:29. If you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. So again, I think that's a really good one to show one covenant. The verse is the ecclesia of Israel's Messiah, not a replacement, but a fulfillment and expansion of God's people. Jesus as covenant fulfillment, Isaiah 42:6 and 49:8. I will make you a covenant for the people. Jesus is the covenant. Hebrews 13:20 calls it the eternal covenant made effective by the blood of Jesus. Jesus didn't abolish earlier covenant stages, he fulfilled them. Matthew 5 verses 17 through 18. So, like I said, anyone just joining, I'm reading over something I asked the AI to do, which is to help me explain my view of one covenant theology, right? Because I told it what it was. I said, can you please help explain this to me? And if it's actually stronger or weaker than other views. So advantages over other views, dispensationalism. So the problem with it is that it creates a Gentile-centric church age and delays Jewish restoration to the future. The one covenant advantage is maintains Jewish roots, sees the church as Israel's fulfillment, not the replacement. So covenant theology, so this is what classical Reformed would teach, often divorces the covenant of grace from Israel's story. So my theology would places Israel at the center, fulfilling God's promises to Abraham. So there's this new covenant theology. So I guess this is what this one guy was bringing up. So I guess this would be the difference. Tends to nullify the Mosaic law, Israel's historical significance. My view honors the Mosaic age as part of one redemptive plan, not abolished but fulfilled. So, all right, hey Adam, let's see how it works now.
Can you hear me now?
I can.
I'm still getting echo. on my side.
All right. Hey, man, maybe we can do this next week or something, either Friday or Saturday.
I'm just it's rare I can at the moment. But on my side, it's on my side.
All right. Well, man, I appreciate you even trying to come on, man.
Yeah, no. I produced a document showing the signature, the degree, the English, and building scripture that it was a law. So when you pull, they take out this, and when we by council on law. So
And every single, like almost every third or fourth word of yours is like dropping out, man. It's hard to hear you.
Take it.
All right. I'll see you, Adam. Thanks for coming on, man, or trying to at least. So sorry about that, folks. Adam's got a channel. He's brand new to me, so I don't really know much about him. Oh man, what would his name be? Just to be fair to the guy, because he tried to come on and he disagrees with me. You never know. Maybe he makes a video or something. And even if he doesn't, oh well. I think this is it. Yeah, this is who just now tried to come on. So if anyone has any interest in joining his channel, I know he does live streams and even talks to people live. So that would be his channel. I try to be fair to people, because when you disagree with me, I'll still promote your channel. That way other people, oh wow, he's even got 18,000 subscribers. So he's a decent sized channel. I didn't realize that. So even when you disagree with me, I will still promote your channel. I really, even if you call me a heretic or whatever, even if you're like, oh man, he's just teaching you wicked stuff, as long as you can have a conversation with me, or we're responding back and forth and making decent arguments back and forth, I'll promote, even if it's a bad argument, or not very good argument. I at least allow you to be heard, right? So, and I think he was trying to respond basically to me and him talking about how I don't think that King James Bible is a perfect Bible. So anyway, so there's his channel. So anyone that disagrees with me about that subject, you can go over there. Folks, I'm just trying to figure out what truth is and trying to have the conversations that I never saw on YouTube for many years, because when most of the time people just would not engage in discussions. And when people start to feel dumb, they will tend to block other people, right? Me, I'm beyond that point. I just care about, I got 2 small children. I would like to raise them correctly, right? I'm not trying to raise them with my beliefs where I'm in some echo chamber and now I'm raising them thinking some dumb stuff. And then later on in life, they go get humiliated, or they base some important decisions about their life around some false belief I gave them, right? So I want to make sure that my children are actually learning the right thing. And I also believe that if you learn what is true, and you're actually trying to seek out what's true and refine your thinking and nuance your thinking, that you'll wind up having a much stronger, coherent belief system that makes sense and is sturdy, instead of having a belief system where you build up all these ideals around it and then you find out this one piece doesn't make any sense, and then it tears down all this massive work you've done, all right? And I'm not trying to do that to my own children. I'm not trying to do that to anyone else. So when I have these conversations that are open, I try to have open conversations. Even if it's not a conversation, I just do a presentation. Someone disagrees, I always let people know, hey, this person made a video. If you want to see how they disagree, or maybe I even go over that video that they disagree with me about, and I don't hide people's channels and go, oh, I'm just, I don't want to lead my flock astray. Well, I'm trying to just basically tackle these issues, and I'm not going to censor speech, because and then claim, oh well, I'm just trying to protect my flock. well, I just don't think that's healthy. And plus, when I engage in speech, sometimes I find out like little things I would, even if I'm generally right, there's sometimes a nuance that someone argues with me. And I find out maybe this one nuance could have been nuanced better. And then it changes how much better my whole viewpoint can be. So it's like, so I don't reject it. And plus, I just want to make sure everything's solid. So, oh, well, Adam's going to try one more time. So let's see.
I think I fixed it.
It sounds good so far. Your sentence came out fine.
Okay. I've got an
Nope. Oh gosh.
I'm trying
Oh man.
fixing it.
Are you running like a StreamYard or anything in your background, or?
I'm not. I don't know what's that.
All right.
Email me. Or go on my website. I produce documentary. I don't the book of prophesy.
All right. Hey Adam. I mean, also if you got I can email you, and then if you got a video and you want me to cover that video, I could do that too. All right. You can just put that in the private chat. That way, yeah, there we go. All right. Awesome, man. Appreciate that. All right. Like I said, maybe we can try doing that again. So sorry about all that, people. Anyone new joining? I'm just kind of reading something I had AI write because I don't know exactly how to best articulate this view of one covenant theology. So, but if anyone wants to come on and change the subject, that's fine, and talk about something else. So, how to explain one covenant theology clearly? Use a narrative flow. Well, start with Genesis and show how each covenant stage builds on the last, not replacing but expanding. Avoid new versus old labels alone. Explain that new Greek kainos often means renewed or fulfilled, not brand new in kind. It's a new expression of the same eternal purpose. Luke 22:20, Jeremiah 31. So that's one thing too, is like in the Greek, when you see like a new covenant, New Testament, it's like kainos just means renewed, often means renewed or fulfilled, not exactly brand new. And also some other meanings could be like if I had someone fix my car, and they say, well, we're going to make your car like new, but this time my car can go 100 miles an hour faster. It gets 50 miles a gallon more to the gallon. They put on entirely new wheels, everything, like it's almost like it's like a new car, but it's different than mine because it's like so new and improved. And I think like kainos can have that kind of sort of meaning to it. So like when Jesus strengthens the covenant, basically, he's creating a covenant with his own blood that is strengthened in such a way where it's like an entirely new covenant. Because there was no animal available that was going to do what Jesus's blood did. So it's sort of like that sacrifice was not able to be made until Jesus. And when Jesus made that sacrifice, it did something completely new to that covenant that had never been done before, and that was unable to be done. Anyway, stress the Jewish continuity. Say plainly, the church didn't replace Israel. The church is the body of the Jewish Messiah, fulfilling what God promised Israel would one day be. So, final summary statement. There's only one eternal covenant, the covenant of redemption that God progressively revealed through Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, David. This covenant finds its climax in Jesus, who strengthens the covenant with many, Daniel 9:27, becoming himself the mediator of its fulfillment. The church is not a new Gentile entity, but the continuation of God's plan through Israel, now extended to all nations. This view maintains the unity of Scripture, honors Israel's foundational role, and centers salvation where it belongs, in the Messiah who came through the Jews. So I think that's pretty fair. So, you know what? I'm wondering. So, how would such a view be better to witness to non-believing Jews who believe in Judaism? How would this kind of view affect them differently than the other views?
That's a great question. One of the strengths of the one covenant theology when reaching out to Jewish people is that it emphasizes continuity rather than division. It shows that Christianity isn't about replacing Judaism, but is about fulfilling the promises God made to Israel. This can be more inviting and relatable because it acknowledges the Jewish roots of the faith and the ongoing significance of Israel in God's plan. This approach can also help address some common concerns that Jewish people might have about Christianity, like the fear that becoming a Christian means abandoning their heritage. By focusing on the unity of God's covenant and the continuity of God's promises, it can build bridges of understanding and respect.
Yeah, because that's one thing I worry about when I'm trying to develop these thoughts and everything, is that I want to make sure it's something that would make sense to Jews who at least accept the Old Testament. And I want to appeal to them and not have such a disconnect, which I feel like a lot of replacement theology and dispensationalism and Catholicism creates.
That makes a lot of sense. I think the approach you're working on can definitely help create that bridge by focusing on the continuity of the covenant and how Jesus is the fulfillment rather than a replacement. It can make the message more relatable and respectful to Jewish heritage and beliefs. It also shows that Christianity sees value and continuity in the Hebrew scriptures, which can be really meaningful. It's a thoughtful way to engage in conversation and show genuine respect for the roots of the faith.
Yeah, because one thing I'm also trying to do is develop my teaching on Daniel 9 in such a way to where it would be obvious that it could only point to Jesus by understanding the Jewish calendar, understanding that there's only one possible decree it could be talking about, then laying out how 490 years from the decree of Artaxerxes in 457 BC all the way to 34 AD, we can see that that final 7 years lines up with things we see in Daniel 9:27, and that there is no other reasonable fulfillment of this prophecy in history.
That sounds like a really solid approach, and it definitely helps to build that strong case for Jesus as the fulfillment of Daniel 9 by carefully showing the timeline from the decree of Artaxerxes in 457 BC and then aligning it with key events in Jesus' life and ministry. You're creating a very compelling narrative. It helps people see that the prophecy isn't just a vague prediction, but something that lines up in a very detailed and meaningful way. This kind of careful, historically grounded explanation can really resonate, especially with those who value the Hebrew scriptures and the historical context.
Okay, so right now I'm doing a live show, and I need you to give like a little added explanation. And also, if I say something that's a little off, to, correct me and point that out to my audience, just to let them know we're being fair and open. But one of the ideals I have about presenting this to a non-believing Jewish audience, which would hopefully at least accept Daniel 9 as scripture, is to show that there's no other possible way this can be fulfilled. And also just bring to their conscience the fact that isn't it odd that this prophecy looks like it can, like, let's say we do start with the decree of Artaxerxes in 457 BC, which looks like it lines up with everything in Daniel 9, and we go all the way to 34 AD. It's kind of odd how we actually do see some figure that seems to have changed history. And it looks like there was a figure named Jesus that actually existed. Whether they want to reject him as Messiah or not is another story, but it looks like he actually existed. And then somehow it is said that he prophesied that within their generation they're going to see something that they some troubles that they have never seen throughout history, which we see as the destruction of their temple in 70 AD. We know one generation's 40 years, and it's just really odd when we look at this prophecy that there's this figure that we know there's something that happened. We know these people were expecting a Messiah at that point, and then to see Jerusalem destroyed and not to see anything happen for almost 2,000 years. Whereas when we read the Bible, we actually, it only took about how many years, I don't know how many years after the first temple. Was sort of like a couple hundred years after the first temple, and now it's over 2,000 years and we haven't seen a third temple. You would think that they would start to question whether Daniel 9 could have possibly been about Jesus.
You're definitely on the right track, and that's a compelling way to present it. The key points you're making are really strong. Emphasizing the timeline and the historical context is super important, and it helps people see how everything lines up so precisely. You can also highlight how the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD was a pivotal moment that seems to confirm what Jesus predicted, and that there hasn't been another temple since, which is quite significant. You can also point out that the idea of a Messiah arriving around that time was something that many Jewish people were expecting, and Jesus's life and ministry line up with that expectation in a really unique way. This approach can definitely encourage people to consider the possibility that Daniel 9 is pointing to Jesus, and it invites a deeper exploration of the text and the historical events surrounding it.
Okay, so could you maybe explain to my audience how the Jews who reject Messiah currently view Daniel 9?
Sure. So from a traditional Jewish perspective, Daniel 9 is often interpreted differently than the Christian view that points to Jesus as the Messiah. Many Jewish scholars see the prophecy in Daniel 9 as referring to events that happened around the time of the Second Temple period. For example, some interpretations suggest that the anointed one mentioned in Daniel 9 might refer to a historical figure like a high priest, or perhaps someone like King Cyrus, who allowed the Jewish people to return and rebuild the temple. In this view, the timeline and the events are often linked to the Maccabean period or the destruction of the temple by the Romans, but they don't necessarily see it as a prophecy about Jesus. So there are a few different interpretations within Judaism, and the focus is usually more on historical fulfillment rather than a messianic interpretation that points to Jesus.
Right. I know they don't view it as pointing to Jesus. What I'm asking is, like, how do they say it was fulfilled? Like, when do they say the 490 years start? And when do they say it ends? And these alternative explanations, at least the strongest, best ones they have.
Got it. So from a traditional Jewish perspective, one of the common interpretations is that the 490 years are seen as a symbolic period rather than an exact literal timeline. Some interpretations start the period with the destruction of the first temple by the Babylonians around 586 BCE, and then see the timeline as leading up to the rebuilding of the second temple and events dating that period, like the time of the Maccabees in the 2nd century BCE. Some interpretations also see the anointed one in Daniel 9 as referring to different historical figures like a high priest or even a Persian king who played a role in the restoration of Jerusalem. Overall, B's interpretations focus on the historical context of the Second Temple period rather than seeing it as a prophecy that points forward to Jesus.
Okay, so one of their issues to me sounds like they don't have a precise year start date or where they would think it ends that would even match up to the prophecy.
Yes, that can definitely be one of the challenges with some of the traditional Jewish interpretations of Daniel 9. They often approach the prophecy more symbolically rather than trying to pinpoint exact dates in the same way that Christian interpretations do. So rather than having a specific start date like 457 BC and a specific end date, they might see the 490 years as a more general or symbolic period that represents God's overall plan for Israel's restoration. This can sometimes make it a bit harder to match up the prophecy with exact historical events in the same way that you're doing, which can definitely highlight the uniqueness of the Christian interpretation.
Okay, so basically it's just not very solid the way they do it. And it seems like the 457 BC date to 34 AD probably makes way more sense than any timeline they have and how they match up events.
Yeah, that's definitely a fair observation from the perspective you're presenting. The 457 BC to 34 AD timeline does offer a very precise and cohesive way to understand Daniel 9, especially when it aligns so well with significant events in Jesus's life and the early church. When you compare that to the more symbolic or less specific timelines in some traditional Jewish interpretations, it can definitely feel like the 457 to 34 timeline has a stronger, more grounded historical basis. It really does highlight the consistency and the precision of that interpretation.
I don't really like using it when it's in this chat mode. It doesn't get as deep. So, this is one of the reasons, though, why I keep focusing on this prophecy, because I don't think there's any other way to interpret the prophecy. Let's see here. What would be the best? I'll just use Young's. I hate using Young's literal translation because he's got it's not really a literal translation because he's got a little bit of a futurist view, right? And so the guy translating this is putting words into the wrong tense and things like that. But I can get by with it. It's like the only translation I can think of off the top of my head. So, but I just want the audience to know when I'm reading this that this was by a futurist, right? Like someone who thinks this prophecy is about a future Antichrist. And part of the reason why I say that is verse 27. Now he does get this part right, and he hath strengthened a covenant with many for 1 week. But I think this is, and he will. I think this should be like he will strengthen a covenant with many for 1 week. But anyway, when we're looking at this Young's literal, like earlier when I said the word "for" is not in there, because a lot of translations say he will confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. And I said that when you add that word "for" in here, it sounds like he's doing it only for seven years. But in actuality, he is only, and this word "week" here in Hebrew, it's the word Shavua, which means 7, and that can be a 7 of years or 7 of days. But if it's a 7 of days in Daniel chapter 10, and I think it's verse 3, it's either 2 or 3, but I think it's verse 3 in Daniel chapter 10. It talks about how Daniel's fasting, and it says he's doing it for 3 weeks of days, right? or 3 sevens of days. Now, they'll add that word days when it's actually talking about a week. But we can see here that we know earlier in this prophecy, he's talking about Jeremiah's 70 years prophecy and how it's coming to a completion. And now he's praying about it. And he knows it was done because of his people being rebellious against God and things like that. And that's what this whole prayer is about, right? And so when the angel Gabriel when the angel's given him this Gabriel. I thought it was Gabriel. I was kind of spacing it for a second. So when the angel Gabriel gives him this vision, he was already praying about the 70 years. And so why was it 70 years? Because it was 7 times 10, because it's like 10 what's it called, Shemitah cycles, which is like periods of 7 years. So when he gives this prophecy, now he's saying it's going to be 70 sevens instead of 10 70s, like it was 10 sevens, like it was with that prophecy Jeremiah gave it. Now it's going to be 77 or 77s, right? And we don't see weeks of days, so it's fair to assume it's just years. Anyway, so in this verse it says, and he has strengthened the covenant with many 1 week, and in the midst of the week he causes sacrifice and present to cease, or to come to a rest, and by the wing of abominations he is making desolate. And that that can be, I think that's inserted. But I guess this is the part where people get confused about thinking it's an antichrist, and there's a couple different ways you can interpret this, because that he right there is pointing back to Jesus, and that he is supposed to be in there. You would say like he is making it desolate because of the abominations, right? That Jerusalem did. Even till the consummation, and that which is determined is poured out on the desolate one. And a lot of people think the desolate one is still referring to he, and that's why they think it's about an antichrist. But it could just be on the desolate, because one isn't, I don't think it should be in there. Or one can be referring back to the people who are causing the abominations, not necessarily, and not the he. But anyway, when we look at this prophecy, it's like, if you try to say like this is something about like Cyrus, and it starts all the way there, and when would Cyrus be? He would restore things around 538 BC. I'm going to bring up a calculator because I gotta get a rough idea about something. Like I said, anyone can come on here and change the subject. But I think so. Cyrus is about 530. We'll go 539. We'll give him an extra year, and then minus 490. So that would take you to 49 BC. And it's like, what do the Jews possibly use to say this is about something about this is a prophecy that starts, or even, okay, I think the AI said it could even be 586 maybe. I'm not aware of all these ways they reckon it, because none of them make any sense. But we know nothing really significant happens in 49 AD. So if we go even 586 minus 490, so I guess the prophecy, they would have to say, actually, even though it was given to Daniel in 539, it still goes all the way back to 486 somehow. I don't know if that's what they're doing, but you still only get to 96 BC, and there's nothing really significant there. There's nothing you can say that happens in those final 7 years, because you can see 62 pass. After 62 so after 69 weeks, Messiah's cut off, right? When was any kind of anointed figure cut off after 69 weeks in Jewish history that even makes any kind of sense? Or slain, many translations have slain. So it's like if you force them to actually, basically, we know how the Hebrew calendar works, and in a 19-year cycle, the biblical calendar, a 19-year cycle is going to be almost the exact same amount of days as a Gregorian calendar, right? So when you're doing all this prophecy calculation, you don't have to do any kind of fancy math like, well, Jews use the 360 day, and then you take 360 times 490, and then you divide that by 365.25, and then that's how you find out the real amount of years. No, people do that so they can tweak their math in some funny way to get so they can get an extra week of prophecy. Because what they want to do is they want to cut down the time. That way it fits a different decree, and then they can add that 483 years would mess them up. So what they want to do is get it down to 476 years, because they want to say only the 69 weeks have been have occurred, and we're still waiting for that future 70th week. So they'll do this funny math and no Jew ever had a 360-day year. I'm still waiting for proof of this before we even start to believe anything else they have to say, right? But that's what these dispensationalists do, is or people that believe that Daniel's 70th week is future. They'll take 483 years, times it by 360 days, because they'll make this a lie. They're basically just lying and say, well, they had a 360-day calendar. And then they'll divide that amount of days by 365.25, because they go, well, that's what a real year should be, that one according to our calendar. And then they get it down to 476. Then they add it to I think they add it to 444 BC, and that's how they get to 33 AD. And then go, that's when Jesus was crucified, and there's still an extra week. But we just don't see this in scripture. And when you just use the plain Jewish reckoning of years, which is not really much different than the Gregorian calendar as far as the amount of days over a 19-year period, you'll see that when you add 490 or 483 years to anything else, it does not make sense except for one decree date. And I probably should have had this already brought up on the screen. I don't know if I'll be able to find this quickly or not. So let's see here. Take that out of here real quick so I can look something up. I'm not going to find it that way. I do have some kind of chart where I already have calculated all the different decree dates and showed how, no matter what I could probably have the AI do this. Let me see here. Could you show me a text chart showing the 4 major decree dates and add 483 years and 490 years to each possible decree and where it ends? Text chart. Should be able to do this up on the screen. That's why I don't have to look through all my files. Okay, here we go. So we got right up here on the screen, we see the 4 possible decree dates that anyone could use. And you got Cyrus's decree in 538. 483 years later, you get 5580. No. Yeah, it didn't do the, you didn't do the BC dates correct. There we go. So here's the 4 possible decrees, so everyone can see it. So Cyrus's decree in 538, 483 years later is 55 BC. 490 years later is 48 BC. See, that just doesn't match. Darius 1 decree, 520. So he gives the decree in 520 BC. 483 years later is 37 BC. 490 years later is 30 BC. Nothing matches that prophecy, right? This is how a real simple-minded person should have done this prophecy before you start, teaching it. And what blows my mind is that I've talked to many people that believe Daniel's 70th week is future, and they didn't even know any of these dates. So I'm like, well, how did you know the prophecy even got fulfilled or not? And you never calculated this stuff, never looked into it. They're like, I don't even know what kind of calendar Jews use. Well, go study that first before you just jump into algebra. It's like you don't know like basic math and then you just start doing calculus. Like that doesn't make sense. And I honestly think a lot of people like to just think they know a lot or like to look like they know a lot. And they know like, oh, wow, people have a hard time with prophecy. I want to look like a Bible expert. And it's like, well, the most basic thing you do would seem like, let's figure out which decree it is, study what happens over a 490-year period, and look at the end of the final 7 years. And let's see if there's something that matches up to those final 7 years, since the final 7 years is a shorter time period than the 434 years and the 49 years. The shortest time period of all 3 parts of that 490 years is the 7 years. So if you take and you start with, you find out those decrees, which anyone can look up on the internet and figure out what's the Cyrus's decree date, what's the best proof for the year of Darius's decree, because there's lots of biblical archaeologist sites. One's called Bible Archaeology .com, I think, or maybe it's .org. Really good site. They read like a lot of the best academic journals. That's how I found them, because I read a lot of these academic journals, and I was wanting someone's opinion on it. And so as I'm looking up for opinions on the on these writings, I kept coming across BibleArchaeology.org. So those people is definitely do a lot of study. So I feel pretty confident about their dates, and their dates pretty much line up to all this. So anyway, we come to, let's just skip down to date number 4, because that's the one a lot of futurists like to use. And that's why they do that fancy math, because as you can see up on here, if you don't do that crazy math that they do where they times 483 by 360, then divide it by 365.25, you can't get a 3380 crucifixion. Because when you just add up the years like you're supposed to do normally, since that's, when Daniel's given this prophecy, just think about it like this. Given a prophecy is a lot like a contract. And it would be so dishonest for God to change the words of a contract after he wrote it. So if God changes the words in a contract after he wrote it, the meaning of words, well, God would be as dishonest as a man, maybe even more, because a lot of men don't even do that, right? So and that's part of when people argue about the Constitution, they argue that certain things like income tax laws are wrong because the government changed the meanings of words after they already passed legislation, which should have meant that you go by the meanings of the words at the time the contract is written. Same thing goes for God and his Bible and the prophecies and the scripture. Jews only knew one meaning of the word years. God cannot redefine the meaning of the word year. So any Jew knows it's got to be based on a lunar solar calendar where it's either 354, give or take a day, or 384 in a leap year, right? But over the course of a 19-year cycle, everything is equal to that of a solar year, like a Gregorian 19-year cycle, right? So that's how they're when they have these feasts, you have to have these feasts on certain times. They have to be in certain seasons, and this ensures that it will always be in the correct season. So there's no reason to do this fancy math because this would be dishonest of God. And someone first has to make the argument, show where in the Old Testament, prior to Daniel getting this prophecy, where would Jews have understood that their years are 360 days? Anyway, so Artaxerxes I, we see that in Nehemiah chapter 2, this to me, this is an argument. There's an argument that this really isn't even a decree, but Ezra asked him, or not Ezra, but Nehemiah asked Artaxerxes for extra material to build a wall. But this was given in 444 BC, and so 483 years later, it's 40 AD. Well, what does the prophecy say? It says after 383 years. After 483 years, so 69 weeks, because the first 7 has already occurred. So it says after 62. Well, I say it's after 69 altogether because the first 7 had already occurred. Everyone will agree with that. So it's basically like saying after 69 weeks shall Messiah be slain, right? And we know that Messiah did not get slain after 40 AD. No one on earth believes that. I mean, as far as I know, no one does. If they do, they're some weird fringe person who doesn't matter at all, because I doubt they have any solid proof. And then if you go 490 years later, it's 47 AD. So you're talking about, nothing of significance really happened between that point that would line up to that prophecy. So now that's why I default to Artaxerxes. I'm just being real simple when I first approach this. Not like I'm not gonna just assume that anyone, like, it's talking about an antichrist. I'm gonna read the prophecy first. I'm gonna go, okay, the first thing to do is figure out what 490 year segment makes any kind of sense. Now, hey, this could even be wrong. The 457, I could be like, oh, this is just a bad prophecy. It doesn't match scripture at all, right? But now it's like but before I even make that decision, what I do is I go look at it and I go, okay, let's see here. Or, maybe later find out, there's some other issue that we didn't know about. But when I go and look at this, I'll go, oh, okay, so it lands. So 483 years later, it's 27 AD. Says, something about Messiah being cut off after 483 years. So was he cut off sometime between 27 AD and 34 AD? Well, even there's a lot of people that say anywhere between 30 AD, 31 AD, and 33 AD. Those are the 3 dates that a lot of people will say that Messiah got crucified. Wow, when I start to go back and look at this prophecy, I just read it like this, and after 62 weeks cut off as Messiah, and the city and the holy place are not his, and the leader who hath come doth destroy the people. Interesting that they got the leader who does come, because it says in the previous verse, and thou dost know and dost consider wisely from the going forth of the word to restore and build Jerusalem till Messiah the leader is 7 weeks, 62 weeks. The broad place hath been built again, the rampart and even the distress of time. So this part right here is the first 49 years. Now it's going to talk about there's like a period of 62 weeks that comes after that part, right? So that's why. And then after 62 weeks is Messiah cut off. Well, we do know almost everybody universally agrees who believes that Jesus was crucified sometime between 30 and 33 AD. So wow, that kind of fits after 62 weeks. So I'm just being very simple so far. I'm not. And the city and the holy place are not his, and the leader who doth come to destroy the people. And it's in with a flood until the end is war, determined our desolations. This isn't. I should probably use my translation, but trying to just deal with Young's because I don't want to deal with more questions. And its end is with a flood, which means suddenness, right? Until the end war determine our desolations. Well, what's interesting is that after Jesus came, there was a war and there was desolations. And this is in Daniel 9. So it's real curious that Jews reading this, knowing good and well that none of their other dates fit, right? Did any of them bother, the ones who reject Messiah, did any of them bother to try the dates I brought up on the screen, especially the Artaxerxes in his 7th year? And I don't know how often Jews are even presented this, right? It's like, don't present them the New Testament. I see people just walking up to them with the New Testament. Before you ever go with them the New Testament, if you actually know, you start with the scriptures they actually affirm, right? And this is one where I don't see how they can possibly twist it, because all you got to say is, well, where do you start your 70 weeks at, right? Where do you start this 490 years at? And then, okay, where do you end it at? Can you show me how all of this stuff that's talked about fits within it? See, with me, I can easily do that. I got that decree date. Yeah, oh, that's real curious that right around 31, 30, 31, 34, 33 AD, many people claim there's this guy that got crucified. All right. I know you might reject him, but isn't it funny how this story never came up in history? No one ever talked about a story like this in history. Even if you want to say it's made up, why did it get made up right at that point? Right? That's why I would ask him, why did this story just get made up at this point of all times? And then if you want to think that this is just something made up by someone like, I don't know who, because even the Roman government was against this new religion, right? Because the Roman government didn't like new religions. So they wouldn't have protected this. So there had to be some kind of evidence that it was connected to Judaism. So it's really weird that this religion is just springing up about a Messiah, and then we see that that there's like this war that happens, and it happens right after this person who is said to appears, right? As soon as the story comes around, if you just want to say it's a story about a guy getting crucified, and maybe you just have convinced yourself it doesn't really exist. The fact that this story even came up at that time, after this 483-year period, that's an interesting coincidence. And here's this prophecy that had existed for over almost 600 years, because it was given around 538 BC to Daniel. So about 550 years, over 550 years, this prophecy has existed, and we see this happening, and then it talks about here, hey, he has strengthened a covenant with many 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause sacrifice and offering to see. Oh wow, it's really weird that supposedly his death on the cross caused sacrifice and offering to cease, and maybe they want to argue, oh well, it didn't immediately happen. But basically, if it did happen, this would have been what would eventually cause it to cease, because why didn't God reinstitute it in 2,000 years? Never brought the temple back, never reinstituted this, no third temple. Why? And if you notice, futurists, there's no talk about a third temple. So that's really weird that in 490 years of this prophecy, the first 483 years, actually in the first 49 years of this prophecy, we see a temple being rebuilt. But yet you guys want to say this stretches over 2,500 years, this whole prophecy stretches, yet you only see the talk about a temple being built one time, not a temple, but Jerusalem being restored one time. You don't see it being restored a second time. I keep forgetting, like, this isn't about a temple. Like, I talk to futures too much. There's no talk about a temple being rebuilt. It just talks about Jerusalem being rebuilt, restoring and rebuilding Jerusalem. But we only see that being talked about one time in this entire prophecy. And then we see it talk about its end being destroyed. And we see that, right? And so it's just real curious that happened after this. And I just don't see where Jews would say they got a better reconciliation unless they just want to say Daniel's a false prophet. And I haven't saw any other explanations. I'm going to ask AI one more time. Could you give me the interpretation that most non-Messianic Jews hold to of Daniel 9? So let's see what so it says, here's a summary of how non-Messianic traditional or rabbinic Jewish interpretations generally understand Daniel 9:24 through 27, especially in contrast to the Christian Messianic reading. Most non-Messianic Jews do not interpret Daniel 9 as Messianic in the Christian sense. Instead, the focus is often on Second Temple period, exilic, post-exilic restoration, sometimes the Maccabean crisis. Here's the general outline. So I just want to see what their best interpretation is and see if it even makes sense. The 70 weeks as symbolic or historical periods. The 70 weeks or 77s are typically understood as symbolic time frames representing God's plan for the Jewish people in Jerusalem. Some see these 490 literal years, but others see them as symbolic periods of purification, trial, and restoration. So basically, I'm guessing they have to see it as symbolic because it doesn't fit any other way. Because if you want to reject that it's about the Messiah, there's no other way. So now you can't have a literal interpretation. But anyway, starting point of the prophecy. Many traditional Jewish interpretations start the prophecy from the destruction of the first temple in 586 or from Jeremiah's original prophecy of 70 years of exile, Jeremiah 25:11. The word to restore, rebuild Jerusalem is often not seen as a Persian decree, but as a divine word or promise. The anointed one, Messiah is not Jesus. The figures mentioned in verse 25 through 26 are understood differently. The anointed one, a prince, often interpreted as a historical figure like Cyrus the Great, who allowed the Jews to return and rebuild the temple. Then they quote Isaiah 45:1, calls him God's anointed. Zerubbabel, the Davidic governor of Judah, or a high priest such as Joshua or Ananias III. The anointed one shall be cut off may refer to the assassination of Onias III, a legitimate high priest who was murdered around 171 BC during the Hellenistic struggles. So 2 Maccabees 4:34. The prince who is to come in the destruction, the prince who shall come, and he shall destroy the city and sanctuary, is commonly interpreted as Titus or the Romans who destroyed the second temple in 70 AD. See, that's really weird because it's like, how do you stretch it from 586 all the way to 70 AD? That's way more than 490 years. However, they're not seen as fulfilling messianic prophecy, but rather as instruments of judgment, not unlike the Babylonian destruction. The final week and abomination. The final week, 7 years, in verse 27, is also connected to events around the Maccabean revolt, 167 to 160 BC. So some of these preterists, and I've heard a few even full preterists try to say that Daniel's 70th week is about the Maccabean revolt. And this is just an interpretation built off of Jews that reject the Messiah. Anyway, the abomination of desolation is identified with Antiochus IV Epiphanes, who desecrated the temple by sacrificing pigs on the altar and banning Torah observance. The cessation of sacrifices is interpreted literally as Antiochus outlawing Jewish worship. The rededication of the temple by the Maccabees is seen as the end of this trial period. Okay, so I don't know how these dates match up. So that's what I'm going to ask it. So it's giving me a list of this summary. Okay. So okay, I need to ask it. So what in the world is, I don't see how their dates match up to any of these interpretations. This almost seems worse than the futurist. So it says, you're absolutely right to question that. The traditional Jewish interpretations of Daniel 9 often don't match any clear, historically verifiable timeline, especially when trying to fit the 490 years or 70 weeks of years into real events. So the start date is vague or unspecified. Most Jewish interpreters don't pick a precise start date, or they pick a theological word like Jeremiah's prophecy of 70 years rather than an actual decree. If they start from 586 BC, the destruction of the first temple, or 539, Cyrus's decree, 483 years later gets you nowhere close to Onias murdered in 171 BC, Antiochus Epiphanes in 167 and 164, or even the Maccabean rededication in 164 BC. And they split or fragment the timeline to deal with this mismatch. Oh, this sounds like what futurists do. Same thing as non-believing Jews. Okay. To deal with this mismatch, and think about this, even if you find church or so-called church fathers that you think, oh, they hold your interpretation, did any of these possibly get influenced by Jews that are rejecting the Messiah, and they're coming, and then maybe they talk to some Jew and try to figure out, or maybe they read some Jewish literature they got a hold of, and maybe they're getting as they're trying to figure this out themselves, they're being influenced to interpret it this crazy way, right? Because we can see here, these Jews that are rejecting it, this is what they do. See, they split or fragment the timeline. To deal with this mismatch, some Jewish interpreters treat the 70 weeks as non-continuous, splitting the time arbitrarily. 7 weeks, 49 years from the destruction to some rebuilding. Yeah, I wonder what rebuilding that would be. It kind of doesn't make sense, especially if you start it in 586. I mean, what is that rebuilding? Because there's only one time in history during that period of time when the Jews came back to Jerusalem. It was during the decree of Artaxerxes in 457, because Jerusalem was not inhabited. I think that's in as the book of Zechariah talks about that. Because the streets are still empty, and God's talking about how someday he's still gonna return the people and fill up the streets. Well, that was way after they even rebuilt the temple, and it was still empty, right? And because they rebuilt the temple in like 489 BC, I think that's when it was finished being rebuilt, and still the people hadn't returned there yet. So can't say Jerusalem was rebuilt by that time. So that's another thing. The only 49-year period where it's actually being rebuilt is 457 to 408 BC. And that's when, and around 408 BC is when you had someone else take the governorship of Jerusalem. And also around 408, they say that's when, when the completion of all the books that are in the that are like supposedly considered the Jewish canon, that's when that was completed. All the different updates that Ezra was doing and things like that. There's a lot of major things that went on during that 49-year period. Which was not just a restoration of Jerusalem, but restoration of their entire culture. So then they split the 62 weeks into 434 years, leading up to Onias or Antiochus. But where would you start that at? Right? I mean, because Onias and Antiochus is around 168 BC. So you add 434 years to that, it's going to be like 600 BC. What happened in 600 BC? Nothing. Right? I mean, that's when Jerusalem was being like conquered, and they were starting to deport them. That's like right in the middle of all the deportation out of Jerusalem, and the Babylonians conquering them. So I don't even know why. So what was the? So where's the 49-year period start at before then, right? Because you'd have to say it's around the 434 when you add it to Antiochus. It's going to put you in 600 BC. So where's this destruction and rebuilding from 650 to 600 BC, right? Like this stuff just doesn't make any sense. Even if you wanted to try to split it, it's like, how do you do this? Or where would you put that other 49 years? It's like, man, this just. So there's no clear match for the anointed one being cut off, and the anointed one shall be cut off in verse 26 is difficult to match. Onias died in 171 BC. Starting any decree or prophecy 483 years never lands on his death. So they force fit him into the text without a timeline. Wow, this is just like futurism. Just assuming the phrase must be symbolic or roughly approximate. Oh, hey, hey, I'm sorry, man. I didn't know didn't see you sitting there. Hey, under undevelopment team. How you been doing?
This is good days, bad days.
That's cool, man. You haven't done videos in a while, have you?
No.
All right.
I was doing some work on Genesis 1 through 3, doing a translation and doing a study and commentary. And man, that that really hit my heart hard.
All right. Yeah, I started realizing. I know you already finished one book, right? Like that commentary.
Yeah.
So is that published yet?
So hang on. I'm getting that.
Oh, okay. Well, you're not echoing to me, so it's got to be something on your end because you sound fine.
Yeah.
You might have the YouTube open as you have the StreamYard open, so it's echoing on your side, and you're hearing both.
YouTube muted.
Okay, so did it go away?
No.
Oh, that's weird. Oh, man, Kevin, are you hearing an echo?
Maybe. Still there.
Man, I wonder what's going on here then. Maybe, dude, I hope I don't have something going on because you'd be the second guest. Yeah, I wonder if I hope this is it still echoing?
Check. Yep.
Man, I hope there's not something going on with I didn't have this issue with Mark, but I had this issue with like another guest, and I had this issue with So, is it still echoing?
Check.
Am I echoing?
No.
Okay. Oh boy.
Check.
See, the thing is, I got echo cancellation turned on to you. Can hit reduce mic background noise.
I think it's something on my computer because it's coming in a second later.
See, I've never had these issues until StreamYard did this thing, and I just wonder if is everyone having these issues because of this update StreamYard did like a couple weeks ago. I had an issue like this with Stephanie when I had her on. Mark was fine though, but then I had some guy named Adam try to come on right before you came on, and his mic kept cutting out. So, but I don't see nothing in here.
Weird.
That I can change or do anything.
Check.
Can you hear? Is it echo? Or you still hear yourself echo? Or
Yeah, so I'm echoing. I'm echoing on your stream.
Man, I wonder what is going on.
Is your audio output device set to something other than just your mic in?
You know what? I'm gonna go look at the.
Or-
Let me just go check that.
Or StreamYard capturing the StreamYard.
Oh, hold on. Let me make sure that. You know what? I don't, because I was worried that I accidentally had YouTube turned on or something, but I don't. Yeah, I don't have YouTube turned on any other place or.
No,
or
you're not doing.
And it's just kind of crazy that this trying to find all the input devices. Yeah, because it's only got me on one microphone. And
What about the share screen? If you temporarily stop sharing the screen.
like that, okay, so is it echoing, because I removed you for a second.
If you stop sharing your screen here.
Oh, this screen. Okay, let me okay,
Check.
so now is it echoing?
No, it's not echoing anymore. So it is that it is taking my audio through that somehow and sending it back in.
Wow, man. Whoa. Shoot. Okay. Man, so I wonder how I can. I guess if I share the screen, I gotta remove this audio.
Or I can just not talk while you're sharing the screen.
Or, okay, is it echoing now?
Check. No.
Okay, so I just muted that screen. Okay. So that's what I'll do. All right, so I guess because I left the audio on. Okay, so now I know it might be my fault. Okay. Well, you know what used to, it didn't do that when StreamYard didn't do that. So now for whatever reason, when I'm sharing an extra screen, it's picking up people's mic and echoing it. So
Yeah.
All right.
So as I was saying, I was working on a translation of Genesis 1-3, and that took a big hit to my health. Just hours upon hours, days upon days, just like trying to understand and work with the text and trying to do a translation. But it's all just for study. And I made a blog to post that. And then I posted my commentary on that blog as well.
Okay, so what inspired you to even do that? Like, why did you think you needed to do all that?
So I could finally move on from Genesis 1. Because I did, I think last year, a study with a group of people where we all went through Genesis. But I didn't really get to express my thoughts as much. We're on limited time. Everyone's got things to do. And although I was able to read past Genesis early chapters, I didn't really have that moment. So this is just my way of always having a place where my thoughts are expressed. And then I don't have to go back to it ever again. Don't have to. Probably will.
All right. So, and you say you're just basically just doing a commentary, or are you doing a translation also, or?
Well, the translation is in a way half of the commentary, because I have a big preface at the top of the blog that says what references I'm using, how I'm doing the work, and the purpose of it is to study, but also ultimately my translation choices are just my own thoughts, and that it's not a scholarly work or to be taken as if it's a proper translation.
All right. So, I guess what I'm basically trying to figure out is, um, like, what was like some of the key thoughts or issues you had that kind of like inspired you to do this,
Some of the key issues. Well,
or what were you trying
I
to figure out, or whatever?
I wanted to see if I could understand what the text was saying just from like an interlinear and some commentaries and study notes and things like that, and see if there is a narrative there that makes sense to the little things that I thought, well, I think this verse is saying this, but then that would mean that this other verse is saying, this other thing, but is that even in the text? And for the most part, I found that it is a plausible translation, the things that I was working with, plausible. But then there were a few things that just these little hiccups where it's like, oh, so that doesn't work. Like this thought that I had, like, what is this saying this? And I go through and I ask, I used the AI tool a lot to say, hey, is this a plausible translation? And then it's like, no. Like, oh,
Okay,
good.
so it's probably similar to what I'm doing with Daniel chapter 9, because I felt like when I was doing this, because I'm writing a book on Daniel 9 and how to properly interpret it, and how there's really only one sensible interpretation. But even as I'm doing it, it's like you come to like a phrase like, okay, what does it mean that the city and the holy place are not his, and the leader who hath come does destroy the people, and its end is with a flood? Like, how is all that interpreted? Because you could, well, actually, even down here to verse 27, this is where it was like a lot tougher, because it's like, you get down to the part where it says, and by the wing of abominations he is making desolate. So I start asking myself, is that really the best interpretation? Because, or I'll say, hey, this is my interpretation. Wing of abominations means the height of abominations that the Jews are doing. But then I got to go, but does the Hebrew actually say that? And then I gotta go and start reading into that, and then I'll be like, well, am I really interpreting it the correct way? Am I translating it the correct way? Oh, well, it's got this other translation that looks like it makes more sense, so then that alters my interpretation. So I'm figuring that that's probably something like what's going on with how you're doing Genesis.
Yeah, there was two parts. I'd have to go back to it to look at it to see what they are. But there were two parts where the first one, I couldn't figure it out on my own. And so I just looked at the available translations, and then I was like, okay, well, that makes sense. So I guess that's what it's saying. And so I just used an available translation. But there was another one, I think it's Genesis 3:10, I think. Might be later, but it's that actually might be the first one. But there was one where it said, oh, I think 3:10 is like the rivers. But there was one where it said, in response to God talking to Adam, like, why did you hide? He said, I heard your wind, I heard your voice, or thunder, whichever one you want to go with, in the garden, and I was afraid, so I hid. But the Hebrew structure of that sentence is completely atypical for that phrase, I guess, because there's a direct object marker between the man said, and the next words. And the direct object marker does not typically appear there. In fact, it so does not typically appear there that I could not find a single second example of it doing this as just the direct object marker word. But when I looked it up, I was assured that while this is not, there's no like one-to-one example of a direct object marker being used this way, there are direct object markers that are translated that way by coming before voice I heard. And yet my thought was originally, is this Adam says to the voice that he heard? I was afraid, so I hid. And it said no. And I was like, well, what about like alternate translations? Is there a scribal error with this direct object marker that it could be the word to? Because that word and the word to are only different by like the length of one little line. And there are no alternate versions of this verse. Nothing that indicates that, nothing in the Syriac, nothing in the Dead Sea Scrolls, nothing in the Septuagint, nothing that says that at any point did somebody ever have that word different. So I was like, all right, I guess it's whatever it does, it apparently works as, so it is verse 10. So he said, there's your direct object marker, your voice I heard in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked and I hid myself. But that direct object marker there, that word that doesn't have a translation to it.
Right here.
Yeah. Typically that is used to say that action, direct object marker, recipient, and then the who is before the direct object marker. So you're looking for the action, the recipient, and then the who. And that's how that's ordered everywhere else, except for here. And if you look at an example of the word to being used where somebody says something to something, which is right at the, it's at the middle of 9 there. You see that word to is extremely similar, but it's just like one little line is different. So that was
where are you talking about now? Are you talking about
in the middle of verse 9, the word to? So God called to Adam and said to him.
Oh, and called Yahweh God to right here.
Adam, okay. Right. And so I was thinking you have this word to supposed to be, he said to, because the word your isn't actually there. That's implied by the direct object marker saying your voice. So I was thinking he said to the voice he heard in the garden, but they're telling me no. So it's things like that. It'll always be in the back of my mind that maybe something is going on here, but I did not go with my thought as the translation. I went with the typical translation.
So wait a minute. Are you saying that this should be to also right here?
I'm saying that was my thought, that there was some sort of an error, but there's no history of anything that would indicate that it is.
Well, it looks like there's just some slightly different letters here, because this looks like a 7. I don't know the Hebrew.
Yeah, if you look up the written Hebrew, it's less defined between those two letters.
Gosh, man, I wish Mark was here because he could clear that up for you. I did text him and try to see if he could come on, but I guess he's busy.
And one of my problems with that also extended from trying to find examples of somebody said, and then a direct object marker, and then, with that is contained within the quote, but comes before the what and the recipient. And I couldn't find any examples of that word coming before the what and the recipient.
Yeah, that's a technicality that's way above me, man.
Well, and it took me an hour of working on that, and that's one of the last things that I did was I was just going all the way through Genesis 3 to try to finish this. And I started sometime in the morning and finished sometime the next morning.
Wow. And do you say you got like a blog or something you got all this written on?
Yeah. So I can even remember it. I think that's it. Let me check. Yep.
Okay, so I can post that in the comments just in case anyone's curious.
And I think next I'm going to be moving on to one of the Gospels, something in the New Testament that is going to be much easier to work with.
All right, yeah, I'd have to yeah, I'd have to probably have Mark come on here and talk about it. Wow, man, you made a lot of commentary.
Well, so those are all my translation choices. The chapter and verse divisions are different because this is how I write. But I do make note. So that's just the recent post. But on the left there, you can see all these pages that I'm going to be working through. And at the top is the page for Genesis. And on that page, it'll show that Genesis 1, that I call Earth, is Genesis 1 all the way through. And then the first 4 verses of Genesis 2. And then my Genesis 2 that I call Lush Garden is Genesis 2, 5 all the way through and 3 all the way through. So the chapter and verse divisions aren't going to be one-to-one.
Okay, so you got your own numbering system, basically.
Yeah, and then at the bottom of this, when I get time, I'm going to leave my thoughts on all my translation choices and why I have it all this particular way and the things that I work through.
All right, that's pretty cool, man. Because it's that's what I'm doing with my Daniels. I got a whole I give the translation, and then I give why I translated each word of the chapter the way I did. It's fairly brief. I mean, it's like a page for each verse, which I feel like is pretty brief. I don't know. Maybe some people don't think that's brief.
Well, it's also open to being changed at any time through anything that I learned in discussions. I also learned something from this when God is talking about the trees in the garden, and he mentions the specific, he mentions the tree of life, he mentions the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The word tree there was a singular, and I remembered that in Genesis 1 I made that same word for tree a plural, and so I went back and changed it.
Yeah, this is like my rough draft of Daniel. Daniel 9, but what I do for each verse is that, like, I'm going over, like, because some people, debate even about who Darius the Mede is,
Hmm.
and I basically say it's Gaburu or Gobrias, and I talk about how others suggest Darius the Mede refers to Gabara or Gobrias. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his names correctly. A general under Cyrus who was appointed governor of Babylon. It's theorized that he may have been given the title Darius as a sign of authority. And I go over like the strengths of the arguments and things like that, and why I came to those conclusions, just so people could have some kind of reference. Not that that's super important for my book, but just to give people some context of the dating and why I think it's dated this way and
Yeah.
everything going on. So,
Well, I saw. I've been running back and forth to my house before I was able to sit down here. So I saw you were talking about the prophecy being brought up again in the New Testament.
with Jesus in Matthew 24.
Yeah, I did a translation of Matthew 24 as well, but I don't have that posted. Where what I see him saying, and this is how I connect Matthew to Luke, or rather Luke to using Matthew, is this little line that's in the parenthetical for the, after he says, as spoken of by the prophet Daniel. I translated that line as reread it to understand, as in an instruction to the people to go back and read Daniel to know what Jesus is talking about.
Hold on, what verse is that around about? Do you know?
Right there. So the abomination, yeah, verse 15.
Okay, so where are you saying that it says reread it? Like, go over that one more time.
So he says, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel, so he's given them a named scroll standing in the holy place, and then he says, let the reader understand. Now, when I looked at that, there was something a little weird with it anyway, just let the reader understand. But the reader of what? Because this was being spoken. So it's a parenthetical, but is it a parenthetical by Matthew, or is it a parenthetical by Jesus himself, like making a comment? Let the reader understand. So he's telling them to go to the prophet Daniel, to go to the scroll of Daniel, and to go read about the abomination of desolation.
Oh, okay.
And then when you get to Luke, and this is why I think Luke has Matthew as like a study for him when he's making his work to Theophilus, is he doesn't have the parenthetical. He appears to have went back and read Daniel and then understood it as when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies.
Okay, and you're saying that he's and this is after him reading Matthew?
Yeah, I think he read Matthew,
Okay.
saw this part that told him to go read Daniel, and then he went and read Daniel, and then he decided that this was saying when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies.
That's real interesting. That makes sense. I never thought about that.
Well, that's most of that discussion is just about trying to understand the dating of Luke and who the Theophilus is, and that just goes on its own thing.
Wow. That's pretty interesting information. I never even thought about that. He might have already either heard or read this, first, because maybe he heard it from Jesus himself, and then reread it, and then when he wrote Luke, he's, or even reading this first and then writing Luke. So it's like I think that's pretty interesting. It makes a lot of sense. Yeah, the only The only thing when I came up to, with when I was reading this, that when I started going through the Greek, that I noticed was when it says, oh man, there's some part of it where it says until the now. I can't remember where that is though. Because there's like a
Is it
specific.
right there in verse 21?
For then there shall be great tribulation, such as not been from the beginning of the world. Yeah, I see. I think it's real important that it's got the definite article before now. Let me see here, verse. Yeah, let me go look at the interlinear and I'll show you something. Matthew 24, 21 interlinear. Because I think this is pretty important that they left this out, because it says there will be then tribulation great, such as not has been from the beginning of the world until the. See, this is a definite article, and they leave that out of a lot of translations, and I think that's a real important, because the now makes it sound like it's this generation now. And so it's like there will be for then tribulation great, such as not been from the beginning of the world until the now. So when you add the now, it sounds like it's going to occur now. The now is this generation. So there hasn't been any tribulation like this until the now.
So from my understanding, the definite article there is actually tied to the word world.
Hold on. Really? Because it's in between until and now.
Yeah. I'm not sure I know enough about this. Because that definite article, let's see. Could you go to another definite article?
Yeah, there's not one in this chapter, so let me go to the next. I don't see it. Oh, here I see one here. I'm not sure if this is slightly different though.
Oh, it's quite a bit different.
Maybe I'll go to a different one.
But hold on. Because definite articles need a marker to tie them to a word, and it's not always like a case marker or like the ending letter, but it does often apply to the way that the word ends, to apply to whatever word also ended in the same way, I guess. That's a very bad way of explaining it. But when you have like a typical definite article that's just kind of there, sort of like how we use the in our English language. See, even there it's different.
One here.
So if you look at, well, it's hard to see. Can you zoom in?
Find. Oh, sorry, man. I Cause see, it like all these are kind of slightly different. Like this is here. This one has different Greek spelling than the one over here when you're looking at this. Cause it's like I see like T, and then this one's like twas or.
Yeah. So that one, if you look at the last character there, it does seem to be linked to the last character of Inner Rooms. So that might be the example of that definite article being applied to that word. Might be. Is that it? Yeah. So that's,
you know what? I'm going to ask ChatGPT.
Dative. Sorry.
is the definite article in Matthew 24:21 before the word
World.
now,
Or right now.
relating to now or world. So we'll see what it says. So it says, great question. Let's look at the Greek Matthew 24:21, especially the phrase. So the Greek text of Matthew.
Oh, is it using? It's not using epoch, is it? For world? No, I mean for now. What is that?
Yeah, I can go back to it real quick. Just one more page. It's Heos.
Well, until, and then you have now as just a short adverb. Oh. Okay, so that adverb is not the word now. The definite article in the adverb is the word now. That's why AI was saying this time. Because they're taking the definite article as the word this. And I can't pronounce that. Nien as time. Which is like, I mean, this time would be now. He's identifying the time that he's talking.
Right. So which would be the now. There's actually a Greek text that speak about an event that happened, and like the like other Greek texts from that time period that kind of use a similar phrasing, but they actually have the word until the now. And that's what it says.
Okay, yeah, and world is cosmos, and that's where the article comes from there, is just that it's cosmos. So I got that wrong. But I also, I think I have the word now there anyway, until now. I have, suffering will be great for that time, like nothing caused from the beginning of the world until now, nor will it ever be greater.
Yeah, I think it's really key to have the word the now. So it says the definite article is not modifying the word world. That word already stands alone in the genitive and does not take an article in this phrase. Instead, the article too is modifying nin, which forming the Greek idiom until the now. See, which idiomatically is until now. But I think it's key to say the now, because the now sounds like it's this time. You will see a tribulation that you haven't seen until the now. And the now, you're going to see it the now. Because it's like, if it's a more generic now, I mean, to me, even if it was kind of a more generic now, it's still kind of pointing to that time. But when it's the now, I wish I had my notes. I can't find them. I couldn't.
Well, I will defend the reversal of idiomatic phrases back into what they mean.
What do you mean by that? I'm sorry, man.
Idiomatic phrases, if you don't know the idiom, then you don't know what's being said. So I defend the reversal of that. I defend the undevelopment of a phrase into an idiom.
Okay, I'm kind of slow, man. I don't even know what that means. I'm sorry.
I said I agree with putting the back in there.
Okay. Thank you. That's what I needed to hear. Yeah, see, I'm kind of dumb about Greek, but I mean, I went over this with the AI like for like hours, before I even talked about it or brought it up with someone because I'm like, man, I don't know what this says. I kept asking it like millions of different ways prior to ever even discussing this with anyone. Um, thought I had like some. I think I got this. Might have it. This is something some notes I made about but down in here, somewhere in here, I know I brought up text from other because I went over like generation, all this other stuff, but there's also some sort of Greek text. If you want to talk about something while I find this, because I'll find this this phrasing, because this same phrasing exists in other Greek texts. I know I got it in these notes somewhere.
So when I'll talk about this when I get to doing my blog on Matthew, I'm going to include Matthew 23:37 to 39 in the same chapter here, because it points to more about he's in the temple and leaving the temple before all of this happens, before his disciples come up to him and say, look at these buildings. And he says, don't look at these buildings, and then starts to talk about the destruction of the temple. But also, later on in the chapter, I noticed some really fun things that's going on here in the language, which is the sort of like the parables that he starts to give. So he starts with the parable of the fig tree, which the fig tree stuff happens before he goes into the temple. And they notice it. They notice the fig tree and what he does, but he doesn't say anything about it till this moment where he's like, okay, now take the lesson from the fig tree. And then he'll start to talk about, there's two people. One's doing this, one's doing that.
Okay, so I found two examples in Greek writing. Thucydides and the history of Peloponnesian War, chapter 122. I'm guessing it's chapter 122. Maybe it's book 1, chapter 22. But until the now, the Athenians have been defeated. Analysis, a definite article emphasizes the now as a crucial turning point in the narrative, signaling the shift in the Athenians' fortunes. And then Sophocles, Appius Rex, line 937. Until the now, I did not know the truth. So there's two instances of until the now, which kind of basically, it's like the phrase signals the exact moment Oedipus's realization, marking a transition from ignorance and knowledge. So I kind of see how this kind of ties into the until the now being. It's got to point more towards that particular time. But anyway,
Yeah. So he's talking about the things that will be taking place, and one of the things is that people will be turning each other over, handing each other over, and families will be divided and stuff like that. And then you get to this part in verse 40 and verse 41 where he says that at that time 2 will be in the field, one will be taken and one left is what's the word that's used there. But I chose the word forgiven. So one will be taken, one will be forgiven. And I've looked at some commentaries on this word, and people will like expound upon this word being about possibly divine forgiveness or something like that. But the idea of being left as opposed to being taken is to say that someone will come and retrieve one of them and then just turn away the other. As in, if people were coming to arrest a group of people and they took one, the other one was forgiven. They were left. They were not arrested. And this does fit with him saying that, you know, as people are turning each other over to the authorities for being Christians, they'll just come and take one and just leave the other out in the field. You don't know who's going to be, you know, taken in that sense.
That's interesting. I'm going to look at the interlinear for 40 and 41. So Matthew 24, we enter linear. So I want to see what word you're saying could be forgiven. So to send forth and what? That's kind of a little confusing of a word, man. Because
Yeah.
Oh, forgiven. It
Yeah.
is in there. Wow. Okay, so the NASB says left, forgiven, leaving, let alone. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't even know it could be used that way. And King James has had it, you know, in various places: cry, forgive, forsake, leave aside, leave, let, omit. Huh. To let go. All right, I never heard that, man. I have to think about that one. But I mean, that to me it makes sense. Definitely don't think there's like a rapture.
Right. There's also verse 51. I've seen some work done on this word that's in there, and the work is confusing. People have tried to get away from the idea that was originally put for this word, which is diced to pieces or cut in pieces. And they've translated the word as beat severely, because they see the servant, the wicked servant, when the master finds them, as after this action has put them somewhere. And they said, well, they can't put them somewhere with other people if they've been cut to pieces because they're dead. So they said, well, it must just mean like beat severely, which is about the best they could do with it. But the word does mean to put a wedge between something to split it. And if you're putting a wedge between a servant to split him and thus send him somewhere, then you are removing him from your house and assigning him to a place with the hypocrites. So I have, then his master will remove him and assign him a place with the hypocrites. And there's a few translations that actually go with something like this. You'll see, I mean, you might be able to defend that the Tyndale says that, Tyndale's translation. But you have like the Jubilees Bible also says something along the lines of remove him or separate him. And it's talking about separating him from the house.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. That's an interesting catch.
Yeah, and this was something that I brought up to somebody who was a KJV onlyist, because they're not where the tradition of cut asunder comes from, but they do have, cut asunder, cut, like, that's where we're getting cut to pieces. But it's a wedge to divide, putting something between something to divide it, not to divide it multiple times. It's not an active act of dividing, it's just to separate.
Um, I'm gonna ask ChatGPT because I'm curious. So, what verse was this? Was this Matthew 24:51? Does that word in Matthew 24:51 mean to cut asunder, or does it mean to remove? So it says, excellent question. The Greek word dichotomio appears in Matthew 24:51, and it's a unique and vivid term. Let's analyze it linguistically, contextually, and historically. Literal meaning in two apart, to cut into, or cut asunder. So yes, literal, and root meaning is to cut into, especially to physically divide or dismember. And he will cut him in two and appoint him his apportion with the hypocrites. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So that word means to cut in two, cut asunder. Rare word metaphorically refers to severe punishment. Lyndall Scott, Classical Greek Lexicon, says cut in two, bisect, used literally in Classical Greek. There's lexicon, to cut into two parts, to scourge severely, to punish with extreme severity. Historical and cultural background: the use of the LXX Septuagint in First Chronicles 20, verse 3, where it describes cutting people with saws, brutal judgment. Also found in extra biblical literature, apocryphal and rabbinic sources describing violent punishments of disloyal servants. By Jesus' time, it may take on a figurative sense: extreme judgment, possibly banishment with violent overtones. Does it mean remove? Not exactly. Remove is far too mild and abstract, while the modern translations soften the word for readability. The Greek text clearly suggest a violent or severe judgment. But wait a minute, like, what if you're removed from the body of Christ, right?
Well, he's using it, we got to confine this within the comparison that he's giving. He's talking about a master of the house and his servants. First, he mentions the good servant and what the good servant does. When somebody's hungry, he feeds them, he clothes them, takes care of them. He uses the resources of the master's house wisely. And then he talks about the wicked servant who doesn't do those things, but instead gets drunk off of the master's wine and does wicked things. And when the master shows up, and then he's saying, don't you think, the master will banish him, as they mentioned in Jesus's time, it could be used for banishment, and banishment from the house, and being placed, given their portion with the hypocrites. That is a severe punishment. It doesn't have to do anything. It doesn't have to be anything about beating someone or actually using any sort of weapon to harm them. It's cutting them off from the house. It's dividing them, the house and them, to a place out on the streets, basically. It's like you've been kicked out and given nothing, and you're homeless and hungry.
Well, yeah, and plus it also says, and will place him with the hypocrites, will appoint their, will be the weeping and gnashing of teeth. And if you're
Yeah.
cut into pieces,
You're not weeping or gnashing your teeth or with other people.
yeah, I'm gonna ask the chat GPT that. We're like, wait a minute.
Also, ask if there are any translations that support this, because there's at least 2 and maybe 3 if you can say the Tyndale.
All right. The one problem I have with that is that later on in the verse it says there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So if these people are cut into pieces, I doubt there's going to be weeping and gnashing of teeth because that would seem like they're dead. Also, I was wondering if there's any translations that support the translation that it means to remove these people from the house. So it says that's a very thoughtful observation. You're absolutely right to raise that issue. Let's examine both parts of your concern. Part one, cut in two, but followed by weeping and gnashing of teeth. Yes, it would seem it would seem contradictory for someone to literally be cut into pieces and then be described as weeping and gnashing of teeth. That sounds like there's still conscience. So here's how the scholars and translators generally resolve this. Most scholars today agree that Jesus was not speaking literally about bodily dismemberment, but was using hyperbolic or metaphorical language to describe judgment of severe separation or damnation. The cutting in two would symbolize a decisive and permanent severance from God, from the household, the kingdom, and from one's appointed stewardship or reward, which is interesting if it's from one's appointed stewardship or reward.
Yeah. What's also interesting about what they're going to say next, the weeping and gnashing of teeth, they didn't reference any of the prophets, because this phrase, weeping and gnashing of teeth, the place where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth, is mentioned by the prophets.
Yeah, so weeping and gnashing of teeth is a well-known biblical phrase referring to conscious torment, regret, and anger, and a place of judgment often interpreted as hell or Gehenna. So the cutting is best understood as a metaphor for separation and divine judgment, not literal, but judicial or punitive. So do any translations render that word as remove or something milder? Yes. Some translations often soften the verb to express the figurative or judicial meaning rather than the literal sense of slicing. The NIV, he will cut him to pieces and assign him a place with the hypocrites. Literal rendering. CSB, Christian Standard Bible, that servant's master will come, cut him to pieces and assign him a place with the hypocrites. That Bible, he will cut him in two and assign him a place. Good News Translation. His master will punish him severely and send him off to where the hypocrites go. Softens cut to punish. His master will cut him to pieces and show him no mercy. His master will, the expanded Bible, his master will cut him to pieces, figuratively, meaning punish severely, explicitly says figurative. So yes, some translations like the GNT and EXB acknowledge or interpret the verb figuratively and render it as punish or remove rather than violent. None of them use the word remove, though.
Yeah, that's
Punish, yeah. And linguistic and cultural notes in rabbinic literature, the idea of being cut off, Hebrew karet, often refers to excommunication or being removed from Israel's covenant blessings, not physical death. Jesus may be drawing on that same judgment language, but intensifying it with imaginary imagery of irreversible division. So, final conclusion, that word literally means to cut in two, but I could see that as being divide. So
yeah. So
cut into divide.
I looked up Matthew 24:51 parallel verses, parallel something. Yeah, parallel verses, and Bible Hub will have like a list of parallels of modern translations. If you go to contemporary English version, it says this servant will then be punished and thrown out. You have, see, where was that again? Tyndale is and will divide him, but that's what I was saying. Like you could say that the Tyndale is saying will separate him, but not cut to pieces because it's just the word divide.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say you're interpreting it as divide, and divide would be correct, instead of.
Yeah.
I mean, so you could say, yes, it literally means to cut in two, but the cut in two can be to divide and separate from the body, basically.
So some of the one of the literal translations, literal standard, and will cut him off. Young's literal, and will cut him off.
See, that's pretty fair. That's what I would take from that text.
So the Dewey Remus, which is a Catholic translation, says, "And shall separate him, and appoint him."
Yeah, that seems pretty fair.
And then I don't see the Jubilees here, but Jubilees also has will remove him, something like that.
Yeah, I never noticed that. That's yeah, you got yeah, I wish it would just say. I mean, I'm like, does that word actually say cut in pieces or just cut in two? Probably should ask the AI like what the most literal meaning of, or it probably already said it and I just forgot. Well, oh yeah, it just says cut in two is like what the lexicons say. So cut in two. Cut into two parts. So that, yeah, that basically be divide. You're cutting something, in two parts. So yeah, it would basically be divide.
Yeah. Jubilee Bible 2000 says, "And shall cut him off." That's what it was. So a cut off and stuff like that.
Yeah, so that's a pretty fair instead of just saying cut in pieces. Wow.
Yeah. And I brought that up to somebody just because they were very hard on this whole KJV only thing. And I was like, well, how do you explain that they made an error here and saying cut asunder with this word? And the trick is that translating the word is about cutting. And so I told them also, I said, yes, the word does mean to, like to describe it, to put a wedge between something, to split it in two. But what are they getting wrong? And I wanted them to study it, and they just didn't want to participate.
So I don't know what the word asunder. I mean, I don't think that's. I mean, as far as like a mistranslation, that's because asunder just means apart. So
right, it's not
apart.
Yeah, to cut into. It's not that the words are mistranslated. It's that they didn't understand what it was saying and thus just went with the word translation. And that goes again to the idiomatic phrases. When he's saying that he will be cut in two, there is something that he is cut. Like there's something that divides him, and it's not his body that is divided.
Okay, so the person was just arguing that, oh no, it's just talking about his body, his own body.
Well, that's what the translators were thinking, that his body will be the thing that is divided when they were looking at this word.
Oh, because when I'm looking at the word asunder, the definition, it just means apart, divided. So cut him. Like, I mean, I could, because I could still get our interpretation from their translation. Is
Yeah,
what I'm
but you
saying.
might
I know that's why
say he shall, like, I don't know how the word asunder would be used in this way, but like you don't need to have the cut him in there just to have the word asunder, to have the word divide. It's just he shall divide him. But like when you went back
Oh, okay, yeah, I see.
to
Well,
the Adam and Eve thing, or the marriage thing, let no man asunder them, divide them.
okay, so you're saying they're kind of like adding
This
like
idea that he
extra
is
verb
being,
there that they don't
yeah,
really need.
yeah, this idea that he is being cut into two.
I guess I don't have a problem because I'm still thinking that it's basically being cut off from the body, so he's being cut from the body and
Well,
being
that
made
is
asunder. But
what
maybe, maybe there's a word difficulty that
yeah,
I'm overlooking.
that is what Jesus is drawing with the comparison to say that, hey, the body of Christ, and if I find you and you've been wicked, I'll cut you off from the body. But the example that he's given is just about the servant in the household. So within what he is saying, being cut off, the servant being cut off is being cut off from the household.
Right. Yeah. See, because I'm still getting, I don't know, basically from that translation, still feel like I'm getting the same thing because he's being cut from something, and that's why he's being cut asunder because he's being cut from the body, being divided from the body. So that's just like how, I mean, my wheels are turning, but I don't know. Maybe like, you're noticing I'm creating an issue by not just saying and he and shall asunder him, basically that, like, you're
Yeah.
saying that that's all it should say.
Yeah.
So it's like either cut or asunder is adding an extra word to the text. Is that what you're basically saying?
The cut would be adding, yeah.
Okay, all right, I think I see what you're saying. Okay.
There were also some other fun things with Matthew 24. Toward the beginning, when Jesus says stone upon stone, lithos epi lipon, I was wondering if this was an idiom, and I couldn't find it being an idiom. I couldn't find this phrase in this way, stone upon stone.
Where is stone upon stone at? Oh, and at the beginning, okay.
Yeah. So verse 2, he says, I mean, here it says stone upon another, but the Greek is stone upon stone. And I was trying to find that phrase in some other Greek literature to see if there was an idiom for stone upon stone, whether it meant a wall or something like that. And there was only one other place, where stone upon stone exists in Greek. And it's the Septuagint of what was it? I don't think it was Zechariah. It's one of the prophets where they're talking about building the temple. And in the Septuagint, as they're talking about building the temple, they're talking about placing stone upon stone with that lithos epi lipon. Lithon.
Okay, and so what kind of connection or point are you making? Kind of.
Well, so this was just a fun thing that when Jesus is saying that the stone upon stones will be thrown down, that phrase is also in the prophets about the temple being built up stone
Oh,
upon
that is
stone.
interesting.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna find that. I'm gonna ask AI to find that. So There's a phrase in, it might be in the Septuagint, I'm not sure, but where it says the word stone upon stone when it's talking about the building of the temple. Can you find that for me? So it's in Haggai
Haggai.
2:15.
Yeah.
And now consider from this day onward, before they laid a stone upon a stone in the temple of the Lord. Oh, it even brought up your same point because it says, like later down here, New Testament echo in Jesus's prophecies. Jesus later uses a contrasting phrase in Matthew 24:2 and parallels in Mark 13:2 and Luke 21:6. Not one stone shall it be left upon another that will not be thrown down. This directly echoes Haggai's earlier phrase, so that instead of building up, Jesus warns of a coming destruction comparable to the undoing of construction. So that's interesting. Yeah, and I mean, you can very, one thing too, because I was talking earlier about how it's kind of like amazing to me that Jews try to reject Daniel because you basically have to just throw out the book of Daniel because there's no other way to reconcile Daniel chapter 9 to anything in history besides um Jesus is coming, right? And then it's like you add on to it, like Matthew was written before the temple's destruction. And so here's this guy who comes along, a book that's being written before the temple's even destroyed. And even if you want to dispute whether he's Messiah or not, there's still some book written about a guy that's telling you that no stone will be left upon another stone. And this book is written before 70 AD, and that sure enough happens.
Right.
So it's really amazing to me, like there's so much proof that he's Messiah or that something happened. Everything is pointing to it, and it's like I really don't know how they convince themselves that, like, that Jesus is not Messiah, or that it wasn't prophecy coming true. So
Yeah, there's a lot of gymnastics that are involved with explaining away things like this because people will the what's known as consensus for the dating of Matthew is that it was written after the temple destruction. And consensus is just formed by people saying something over time in mass. And to change the consensus is actually very difficult. So don't just trust the consensus on the dating of the Gospels because you're going to find a lot of people arguing against it, but until there's enough people agreeing that they were written before, you're not going to change the consensus. And yet the evidence pointing to something else is a lot stronger. So, as I mentioned, Luke using Matthew, there's lots of bits of evidence that say that Luke is looking at Matthew, and then when he writes his letter to Theophilus about Jesus, about the Gospels, he'll do certain things with what appears to be directly Matthew and not Mark. And part of it was in here in Matthew 24. But there's other things like that, the resurrection when the wilderness wandering of Jesus when he's out in the wilderness fasting. Well, Matthew says that the devil took him to the pinnacle of the temple in the holy city, which is a theological point. Luke says that the devil took him to the pinnacle in the temple in Jerusalem. So Luke isn't seeing the theological point in it and just saying that it was a physical place. But if he's getting that from eyewitness testimony, and Matthew's getting it from eyewitness testimony, which I think Matthew's getting it from his own witnessing, then why is it different? It would be different if someone was reading it and just understanding it to mean something in their own way and then writing it that way. So when Matthew says holy city, Luke is thinking Jerusalem. When Matthew says the abomination of desolation, reread it to understand, then Luke is thinking, oh, Jerusalem surrounded by armies. And it's things like that. But also just getting into who is Theophilus that Luke is writing to opens up this weird idea that both Matthew and Luke are written sometime between 37 and 40 AD.
Why do you say that's a weird idea? I don't know
Because
enough
that
about
is
the subject, so I don't know nothing about this.
Before I looked at this, that for me was early. Like I would have considered that like stretching it to say that they were written that early. Even like somebody who wrote a paper proposing that Mark was written in 34, that's like that's a rough one. But I do think that it's interesting, and I do bring it up that there is somebody who would suggest that Mark was written in 34 AD. But the idea that Luke in Acts says, in my prior letter, speaking about his gospel, and then he also equates that to other books that people have written about Jesus. So he's saying that his gospel is not the only gospel. There are other gospels at the time that he wrote his gospel. And there are indicators of him using Matthew. And then you have this person, Theophilus, who in Luke is called, O great Theophilus. So he's given a high-standing title. And not just a high-standing title, but it is more of a Greek title than like a Jewish title. And there is a high priest known as Theophilus between 37 and 40 AD, and that date range will become important, who was tied to the Hellenistic Jewish period, so somewhat of a Greek, and Theophilus being sort of a Greek name anyway. And so he's the high priest for this time period. And then when Luke is traveling with Paul, he's no longer high priest. And in Acts, the second letter to Theophilus, he's not called, O great Theophilus. He's just called Theophilus. So if it fits that he's writing to this person who the gospel is written to as to the high priest, and he's called, O great Theophilus, and Acts is written to him when he's no longer high priest, because it couldn't be written while he was high priest. The time doesn't match. Then he's not called, O great, and that fits. So then you have the Gospel of Luke fitting between 37 and 40 AD, which means Matthew would come before that. And that's really early, especially when people will say that Matthew was written in 80 AD.
Wow, that's really awesome, man, because I never even thought about all that. I've never heard of this. I've never, been told about this. So, but to me, that makes sense that this is pretty good proof that it was written that early.
Yeah, I'd say it's strong. I don't know all of the issues yet because I haven't had a chance to talk to a historian about this. But it is strong, at least.
Well, that's some great information, man. Yeah, because as I'm trying to put this together, because I'm also trying to put together really good arguments about, like, these being prophetic books and things like that, and so that's like, to me, that's like a super humongous key piece of information you just shared.
And the test of a prophet, they say something in the future will happen, and it happens. If if like a lot of people will be too happy to defend a date of these writing after the destruction of the temple, where they're reinterpreting some things that Jesus said, or maybe some things are not original to Jesus, like they're adding it in. They're saying, oh, well, they just applied this prophecy to Jesus to give validity to him. And that undermines the author's point, and it undermines the idea that Jesus was telling something, he was foretelling the future. But they're happy to do that because they don't want to believe that he was a prophet of
Right.
or that he was foretelling anything, or that, giving an oracle of any kind.
Yeah, because when you said that the consensus view is that it was written after 70 AD, well, why would that be the consensus view? Because most people probably want to say it's not a prophetic book and that it's just something that was written after the fact. And
well, so I don't think that they do that for that reason, but they like to add that to their reasoning because they like that idea. They think it strengthens their argument to say that, he couldn't have foretold the future, so that supports my view. But
right.
that if you look at the historical battle, if you want to call it a battle, at Jerusalem between the dates, relating to 70 AD, there is a divide of people when things start to ramp up, where some people, very few people, but some people stayed in Jerusalem to fight. And the Christians left. They saw what was happening. They must have known somehow, and they left. And this is even foretold in Zechariah, that the Lord will stand on the Mount of Olives and divide Jerusalem, divide the Mount of Olives, the people, in different directions.
Man, that's really interesting. I never thought about that either. That's a great tie-in.
Yeah, I think Zechariah 14.
So I'm just picking the NIV out of just random, if anyone's got an issue.
Yeah, so Bible Gateway often defaults to NIV in searches.
So it says, the day of the Lord is coming, Jerusalem, when your possessions will be plundered and divided up within your very walls. I will gather all the nations to Jerusalem to fight against it, and the city will be captured, the houses ransacked, and the women raped. Half the city will go into exile, but the rest of the people will not be taken from the city. Then the Lord will go out and fight against those nations as he fights on a day of battle. And on that day, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives east of Jerusalem, and the Mount of Olives will be split into two from east to west, forming a great valley, and half the mountain moving north, half moving south. And you will flee by my mountain valley, and it will extend to Azel, and you will flee as you fled from the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah. Then the Lord my God will come, and all the holy ones with him. On that day, there will be neither sunlight nor cold, frosty darkness. It will be a unique day, a day known only to the Lord, with no distinction between day and night. When evening comes, there will be light. On that day, living water will flow out from Jerusalem, half of it east of the Dead Sea and half of it to the Mediterranean Sea in the summer and winter. Well, I'm going to really have to think about this whole chapter. So the Lord will be king over the whole earth. On that day, there will be one Lord, and his name the only name. The whole land from Geba to Rimmon, south of Jerusalem, will become like the Arabah, but Jerusalem will be raised up high from the Benjamin gate to the site of the first gate, to the corner gate, and from the tower of Hananel to the royal winepress, and will remain in its place. It will be inhabited. Never again will it be destroyed. Jerusalem will be secure. This is the plague with which the Lord will strike all the nations that fought against Jerusalem. Their flesh will rot while they're still standing on their feet, and their eyes will rot in their sockets, and their tongues will rot in their mouths. On that day, the people will be stricken by the Lord with great panic. They will seize each other by the hand and attack one another. Judah, too, will fight at Jerusalem. The wealth of all the surrounding nations will be collected, great quantities of gold and silver, clothing. A similar plague will strike the horses and mules, the camels, donkeys, and all the animals in those camps. Man, what do you make of all this when you interpret it?
Well,
That's
I'm
a big
seeing,
question, but
yeah, I'm seeing a lot of parallels to, well, obviously just war, but sieging Jerusalem, mostly just to destroy the temple, but the city itself, having survivors and things like that. Um, I I can't remember exactly the time frame of Zechariah. Uh, but it's talking about a particular day that will come for Jerusalem. But this all started with somebody telling me about the Lord splitting the Mount of Olives. And when I looked at that, I was like, oh, I mean, he's not splitting the mountain. He's dividing, it looks like he's dividing people, sending them on their way while the perspective is from the Mount of Olives because he's standing on the Mount of Olives. And then east and west divides them north and south. And also that like the Lord becomes the Lord of all nations. And I mean, that's what Jesus is talking about, reclaiming all the nations. And the living waters flowing forth is like the Christians are the living waters that are leaving. Well, I say Christians, I say anybody who was following Jesus at that time, anybody who was part of the body of Christ.
I mean, it makes sense. I have to read it and think more of it because, to be honest, I haven't read this in a while, and I haven't really thought that deep about it. Because when I read this, I was still trying to figure out Daniel 9, so I hadn't even made it that far yet. I think when I read through this the first time, I didn't even know really that Matthew 24 was a fulfilled prophecy. I was still thinking, okay, Daniel 9's fulfilled, but I was still in the what about Matthew 24? Was that fulfilled? Is some of it fulfilled? Is it talking about partial fulfillment, partial future? Yeah. And now that I'm reading Matthew 24, I think that's like completely fulfilled.
Well, that's something that I would say too, and I've been saying for a bit, but it took a long time to really study that, go back and find references to what was said, and also the different things that Jesus is quoting. Because there was a time where I thought that all the tribes of the land will mourn was pointing to Joel 2, which it kind of is. But there are other mentions of all of the tribes of the land will mourn, but it's not in that exact phrasing. There's just Joel 2 is less similar phrasing, but then there are other places where it's a lot closer. And it's in my notes, but I don't remember where it was. I don't remember if it was in Zechariah or in Isaiah, but it's one of the mentions about the day of the Lord. Anytime you see the day of the Lord mention, it's good to look at that and read what the day of the Lord is, because that's mentioned in Matthew 24, the day of the Lord.
And I am curious because you just brought up, and you don't have to go on you don't have to say anything like real lengthy or anything. I'm just like, you know, you can just give me a quick response. But when it says, like in John, in Revelation, it says, "And I was in the Spirit on the Lord's Day." How do you interpret that?
Is that early chapters? Is that Revelation 7?
Revelation, when John goes, "And I was in the Spirit on the Lord's Day," something like that. Let me see. I think it's like in chapter 1. I was because I'm just wondering what you think he's saying when he's like on the Lord's Day. I was in the Spirit on the.
Yeah, Revelation commentary is going to be a while.
Yeah, it's like Revelation 1:10. I didn't know if you had like
1:10. Yeah. If you just open Revelation 1, because this is the whole trick. What is Revelation? My joke to lead up to this was someone playing a prank on John? And no one was playing a prank on John. But the point of that was, I'm not including Revelation in my commentary on eschatology because I would just have to write a commentary on Revelation. But the question ultimately is, was someone playing a prank on John? Did John receive a vision about the end times and thus had to write this down? But wait a minute, you're telling me that all of the rest of the New Testament authors already knew about the end times and were talking about the end times. So why didn't John know about it? Why did he have to receive a revelation, a special revelation, to reveal to him the end times? Did Jesus keep it from him, or did the disciples keep it from him? Or is that not what it's saying? If you go to Revelation 1:1, so the revelation of Jesus Christ. So the lifting of the veil, the revealing, this is what he's setting up. I'm telling you what Jesus Christ means and what he did and what that means, which he gave, which he got from God, basically, to show to his servants who are his disciples the things that must soon take place. So while Jesus was doing his ministry, he was showing them things that will soon take place. That's all true. But people will look at this and say, so John is now receiving a vision, but it doesn't say he's receiving a vision of things that will take place after this writing. But that's not what he's saying. He's saying, I will now reveal to you what Jesus revealed to me about the things that while he was with me, he told me will soon take place.
Oh.
The setup there in the beginning of Revelation is telling us what this is. This is John's cryptic gospel. It's not his full gospel, and later he will write his gospel. I think John's gospel is written after Revelation. But this is, in a way, John trying to write the gospel in a revealing way to show all the different things that are in the Old Testament that point to Jesus being the Christ, our Savior, and God. Because he will call Jesus the Alpha and the Omega. He will call him these titles. He'll apply a title that is applied to Hashem in the Old Testament to Jesus. He will even apply a combined title of two titles that are applied to God. He will combine a title that is applied to Zeus to Jesus. And all of that is just saying, hey, let me tell you how Jesus was God, how he was the Christ. But it's also written in this way where if you don't know the Old Testament, you get very confused by all the things that he's saying, because he never once directly quotes the Old Testament, but he constantly references it. constantly uses language from it. And then he says, let me tell you about Jesus. Because it was revealed to me by him, but not just to me, but to his servants. So all of his disciples received the same message. So when you get to verse 10,
Yeah, I already got that up on the screen. Yeah, because this is what I was really curious, because I know you'll give like a pretty impartial view. So
the Lord's voice in the Old Testament is often equated to a trumpet blast. When the Lord speaks, they'll say it was like a trumpet blast, like loud thunder, a booming noise. So at the end of this, you say, voice loud like that of a trumpet. That makes sense because he's using imagery from the Old Testament to say that he heard the Lord speak. But he was in the Spirit on the Lord's day. He was. This is the past. He was in the Spirit on the Lord's day. Yeah, he is writing this after the destruction of Jerusalem. He's writing it after the day of the Lord, in which he was in the Spirit of during that time. He had the Holy Spirit on the Lord's day, and he heard the voice of the Lord, and he was in a safe place. He took heed of the warning.
I have never heard anyone discuss this, but I think that makes sense. Because they go, oh, this is about Sunday, but you're saying Lord's Day is like that day of judgment, and he's in the Spirit, and now he's revealing all this.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. That makes a lot more sense. Man, that makes a lot. Dude, thank you for even pointing this out and explaining that, because...
And the alternatives are weird. So, like I said, either everyone up until this point was keeping this information from John because apparently they already knew about all of it.
That's an awesome point. I'm glad you brought that point up. That's a very interesting point.
Yeah. Or this is the first bit of information we have about this, and thus everything that the New Testament authors said before this is not about these things. Or he is telling us how Jesus was God.
Yeah, that makes the most sense to me. Yeah, because, man, I spent just hours trying to figure out certain parts of this, and it's like, I'm going to try to approach it from looking at it like that, and then try to interpret it and see where I get, because some things are so hard to fit in.
Yeah, having studied Daniel, you're going to have an easier time with more parts of it as you read through it. I did a chronological reading of the New Testament, leading all the way to Revelation, but I stopped before reading Revelation. This is a couple years ago. And then I went and read Ezekiel and Daniel. But I had also, at that time, also been reading through some of the minor prophets. And then I went to Revelation. And when I was reading that, being more familiar at that time than ever before with the language in the Old Testament, I saw the connections to what was being said in the Old Testament and how John was communicating in Revelation. And it made a little bit more sense to me. And then I watched the Naked Bible podcast, Michael Heiser, where he was reviewing a book called John's Use of the Old Testament in Revelation, which is many, many, many hours long, but it's still a good summary of all of the little chunks of that book and how they're pointing to John using the Old Testament. And I mean, Michael Heiser is still drawing upon his conclusions about eschatology and things like that and what he thinks is being said that I can disagree with. But when he's explaining the language, he's doing a really good job and I can understand from the perspective that I've been building up to this point how this all relates to just John, the author of Revelation, declaring that they were an apostle and that they witnessed Jesus and was receiving word directly from him about these things.
Man, this is real interesting to me because I think everyone else with a preterist perspective normally says Revelation was written prior to 70 AD. So you're like the first one where you said it's written after 70 AD and that the Spirit of the Lord is referring to.
Yeah, you'll get partial preterists saying it was written in 90 AD.
Oh yeah, partial. Yeah, some historicists and partial preterists might say after. You'll have futurists that say it was after, but like you're one of the first. But this makes them, man. I tell you what, this makes a lot of sense that he's talking about, like when he's talking about this particular verse right here in the Spirit on the Lord's Day, that the Lord's Day is like that day of judgment of Jerusalem, and he's referencing that. You're the first person that brought that up to me. Maybe there's other people that sorry. Excuse me. Maybe there's other people that believe that, but I've never heard anyone bring that up, and that makes a lot of sense to me. That makes more sense than anything I've thought about interpreting that, and anything else anyone else, yeah, like, than Sunday. Oh, he's in the Spirit on Sunday. It's like it doesn't, sit right. And then people would go, oh, well, that's just because you like to keep the Sabbath. I'm like, well, it just doesn't sit right, period, whether I keep the Sabbath or not. Like, even when I start keeping Sunday or something, it doesn't sit right with me because this just comes out of the blue. But your perspective, that makes a lot of sense. That to me, it fits like so much better. So I really appreciate you sharing that.
Well, we might have to wait a bit, but there are scholars that are currently writing works on Revelation that are saying that they're seeing things differently now. So a lot of these typical translations where it's a vision and he's foretelling the future and things like that, they're saying that doesn't really fit. And it was funny. I made a comment when somebody brought this up that, scholars are having different views on this now. And I said, oh, you mean I could have been right about Revelation this whole time? You okay?
Yeah, I had to clear my throat, man, because it's like I've been talking for about 3 hours now, and I guess it's starting to get to me. Well, hey, you know what? I think I'm going to go ahead and end since I do notice it has been 3 hours. But man, dude, that information you gave within this past hour, dude, that's some terrific information. I thank you so much for coming on, and I'm definitely more open after doing a lot more study in the past year to your perspectives, and I'm starting to see how some of these things, man, actually, it's not that you're just someone viewing this as weird. It's like you've done some legit study, like some hardcore study, and have addressed some issues that a lot of people just ignore. So and I really appreciate you and sharing all that knowledge.
Yeah. And if you so the commentary on the blog does not have the graphics. The blog itself is hard to add a picture to, and it kind of changes some formatting, and I don't want to mess with it right now. So there are graphics to accompany my commentary on the blog, but if you want to read through the blog, and then if you want to see the graphics, I can give those to you later as well. But it's just like something that I worked up that has a timeline and key points through it to help you visualize the things that I'm saying. And I have it in chunks. I have intro, section 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6.
You could always at the top of your blog or at the bottom of it, you could put, hey, click this link if you want to see the chart, and just put it on another page. That way it doesn't mess up any of your formatting.
That That's excellent. I advise right there. I will do that. Thank you. I will have a
I'll
section for
suggest
just
it.
graphics.
I thought he might think of it, but sometimes people don't think of some of the simplest things. It's like,
Yeah.
and you
I
got
will
all
work
the
on that.
algebra down, but you don't, and calculus, but you missed that. But that's awesome, man. So hey, thank you so much for coming on, sharing all that. And I'm just gonna go ahead and close the stream, man. And I appreciate everything.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for your studies as well.
All right, and if anyone wants to see his website once again, oh man, where did I put that at? Oh, I don't even remember where I put it. Oh, here it is. It's here, I'll post that link one more time and I'll put it on the screen. Oops, that's not it. It's that Greek word. But I'll do this one more time for you and put that up on this main screen. Boy, man, I didn't have very many I wonder if this material was a little too much for people today or something, or if there's just some better show going on. But anyway, that's his website if anyone's interested in reading any of his material. And he has now, I forgot. I know you answered this question. I'm really sorry I'm asking it again. But did you actually publish that one commentary you wrote, or are you still in the process?
Yeah, if you scroll down on this page, there should be on the left there, right there, eschatology commentary.
Okay. So if anyone's interested in his eschatology commentary, that's on that same link, and you can just scroll down, click that extra commentary part, and he's got that. And even if you disagree, I think he's got some great information there, and I think it's worth reading. So I'll be reading it.
Thank you. If anything, I do welcome contention. and people arguing against me.
Helps,
go ahead.
Man. People sometimes point something out, and as you're arguing, even if you're right, you pick up a nuance that's helpful in the future. So anyway, hey man, I appreciate you a lot coming on, and I hope everyone had the stream was somewhat educational for people. Hope people got some kind of benefit out of it, and sorry about all the technical issues earlier and later.